Hello and a really lovely warm welcome to you all. I'm Josie Purcell, the Communications Manager at Westcountry Rivers Trust, and we'd all like to extend a very warm welcome to the Rivers Trust first day of their annual conference, Water at the Heart of Climate Resilience. It's in association with us today and the Interreg Atlantic Area Triple-C project. There are just a few housekeeping notes that I will run through with you. They are, if you want to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens, you can submit a question or vote for others that you would like to be answered by using the Q&A button. You can use the chat function if you'd like to share comments. And to enable the captions, do click the CC button on the bottom toolbar and then show subtitle, click again and select subtitle settings to change the size. Please note that the event is being recorded, and if you can, it'd be lovely if you can share any thoughts or comments on social media as well for us using the hashtag water and climate. I'll now hand over to Westcountry Rivers Trust CEO, Dr. Laurence Couldrick.
Thank you, Josie, and welcome to this Rivers Trust and Westcountry Rivers Trust event. It's great to see so many people logging on, and I'm sure there'll be more that join over time. My job is to try and keep everyone to task this morning up until the second break time. I've got a few slides that I'll run through before handing over to some of our keynote speakers. So I hope you enjoy the day and get a lot out of it. And as I say, do feel free to put some chat into the comments into the chat section, ask questions. We won't be taking questions in this first session, but we will then have a panel discussion after the second session. So what I want to be able to do is just to give you a bit of a flavour of why we're here. And also put into context some of the things that we'll be discussing. So really this conference, Water at the Heart of Climate Resilience, is sponsored by the Triple-C project, and you'll hear a bit more from one of our partners in that, but it really asks that question around how is our catchments, how is our communities, how's our environment changing, and what are we doing about it? And we're going to hear around a lot of the projects that are working to that effect. We know, though, that our catchment is changing, and we know that our climate is changing. We know that sort of the graphic at the bottom here is one of the increasing temperatures since the 1800s. And we know that our temperature has been increasing and the greenhouse gases have been increasing. Now that means that there are several drivers that's driving, sorry, I'll just go back a bit. That's driving changes to our climate. So we have more extreme weather, we have changes in sort of sea level, we have warming oceans, and that creates impacts on us, it creates impacts on animals, and whether that be more localized flooding, whether that's fisheries failures, whether there's changes in seasonalities. That gives us changes in each area of where we live, whether that's in the UK or whether that's in sort of our European partners across the rest of Europe. For the southwest of the UK, that for us really means that we're going to probably be seeing milder, wetter winters. We'll probably see rises in sea level around our coastline, and it means that we'll have hotter, drier summers. But when it does rain, we expect that to be more intense in nature, and you only have to see some of the events that have been happening over the last 10 years to see the impact of that. But alongside a changing climate, we know that there's our catchments have changed dramatically over that same sort of time period, the last 150 odd years. So this is an example of how our catchments have changed. This is a very small catchment around Stoke Climsland, which is in Cornwall, which is where our offices are based. And on the left-hand side is the 1950s map of the area, and it shows the field density pattern. So there were 45 fields in that area back sort of 80 years ago, 90 years ago. but we also know that the amount of nutrients being applied to those fields was less. And because of the difference in machinery, the number of livestock, it means that there's less compaction there. So things like the soil isn't being pressured in the same way. Scroll forwards those 70 years, and what we find is that a lot of the drainage pattern has been simplified. A lot of those field boundaries have gone. We've got more nitrogen, phosphate and potassium being applied. We have more larger and more operations happening at more wetter times of the year, and that means we're getting more compaction across our landscape as well. So what that means is, if we look at how water is released from those areas, instead of it being released slowly after a rainfall event, Q here is the discharge and T is the time. For a typical rainfall event, what we find is the water comes out of our catchment, but it's released relatively slowly, relatively cleanly, and that means that we don't have the same pollution pressures, we don't have the same flooding pressures, and we don't have the same drought pressures because it's held there. Whereas contrast to that, some of our our catchments today, what we're seeing is that water is being shed from the land far quicker. It doesn't infiltrate. It takes with it through runoff soil, but any other materials that are on there, like nutrients or pesticides or any other chemicals for that matter. It floods our catchments downstream, and it means that water is no longer available to supplement base flows. So again, it has impacts in droughts. So we know not only the climate's changed, but the catchment's changed as well. Now, that has an impact on the resilience we have, and it can impact across our catchments, whether it be in the upland areas and the lakelands, whether it's the rivers themselves, our towns, or our estuaries. And that can be through things like eutrophication. It could be things like sudden reductions in oxygen and fish kills or releases of toxins. It could be through things like flooding in our communities, as well as more simple things. Just soil coming down our catchments means we're having to dredge our catchments more regularly. So the impacts are felt across a wide suite of problems we have, a wide suite of areas. But it's not just the climate and the catchment that's changing. We're seeing a change in the political landscape as well. In both good ways and bad, and so we're seeing changes in the way we're funded, changes in the way our national and international politics are working, and that itself has a big impact on the types of activities, the types of impacts we're seeing. So the question is how do we understand what impacts we're facing? And I just wanted to sort of share this idea, this kind of image that people often pick up when we think about indicators and impact. And so this is the canary in the cage image. Cornwall has a proud mining heritage, and canaries were used to indicate the presence of carbon monoxide in the mine. So if the canary was starting to suffer, they would start looking at more pumping more air, more oxygen through the mine to try and alleviate those pressures. So the question is what's the canary in the cage for our environment? Because it's not just us that suffer, it's the habitats and the species that are out there that suffer. So I just wanted to highlight an example of a potential canary in the cage. And it revolves around the plight of the eel. So it may seem a bit strange, considering what we'll talk about for the rest of the for the 2 days, but eel are a remarkable species. They go out as adults and spawn in the Sargasso Sea around the around the Caribbean, and their larvae sort of float back on our Gulf Stream, back to the UK, back to the whole of Western Europe. As they move and migrate up our rivers, as they come in, they're glass eels, very tiny little eels that move through our catchments, try and get over any barriers, any sort of, and find themselves a place to live. And they can live in our catchments for 15, 20 years, sort of feeding, growing, remarkable species, lots of weird things happening in there in terms of things like just their sex is determined when is not determined until they reach around the size of 25 centimeters, and then it's determined by the number of eels in there. So if there's lots of eels, they'll become predominantly male. If there are few females, they'll become female. So fascinating species, but they can be impacted by all the things we've said in terms of change. So in terms of climate change, we have a change in Gulf Stream patterns, and that's changing where those eel larval stages are drifting. So any 1 year that changes the pattern of recruitment into our catchments. We know that things like sea level rise is going to squeeze a lot of the coastal habitat, which is particularly important for those junior juvenile eels as they come in through our systems. And we know that there are changes in river flow, as I said earlier on, with changing rainfall patterns comes changing base flows, changing conditions, changing floods within there. We also know that our catchments have changed. We've reduced and degraded the amount of habitat that eels can live in during their adult life cycle. We know that we've installed over hundreds of years lots of barriers to migration that can stop those glass eels moving up through the system, but can also halt the adults moving out of the system when it's their time to spawn. And there can also be specific pollution of river water that can suddenly strip out the oxygen and can effectively kill everything and anything that's in the way. But we also know, going back to the political changes, that can have an impact. So interestingly, the result of Brexit has meant there have been changes in elver trading. So the trading of collection and fishing of glass eels is a significant trade, significant industry within the UK, but certainly within places like France and Spain, where they have large recruitments of glass eels into their catchments. And so things like Brexit has had an impact in our changing the elver trading. It's also started pushing and changing the way illegal trading is happening, and difficulties in understanding where you can send your eels to, because if we can't trade with Europe at the moment, then it starts pushing for that. And then alongside of that, and this will be an interesting question for today, is around the funding of European management, genuine European level management issues where we have a shared common goal. And again, with Brexit, that raises some interesting questions over how do we address this in the future if the funding is changing over that time. So kind of just as a sort of an interesting sort of posit here is really the canary in the cage. One of them can easily be conceived to be an eel, alongside the impacts that we face as a society. So hopefully that's given you a flavour of some of the things we're going to hear from. I hope you enjoy some of the projects you'll hear in terms of climate change adaptation projects from across Europe. And I'll go into a little while into Diego, who's one of our partners, who will talk around the Triple-C project in a bit more detail and some of the things we're doing before me moving on to our keynote speech. But I have two questions that I want you to ponder as you listen to these talks, as you think around some of the things we're doing. The first one is around how do we increase the impact of our work beyond our projects. Most of the projects you'll see, most of the organisations we work with that are on the call work through projects, and they have a limited timescale, and they can be incredibly impactful as they're running. But what's the legacy of all those projects? And you'll see and hear from that around the Triple-C project, which specifically looks to understand that question. But I'll be interested to hear your views and your thoughts. And the other one, which is more pertinent, specifically with Tony on the line coming in for a keynote, is around for habitats and species, specifically, how do we continue to fund those cross-border collaborations where there is genuine need for cooperation between our peers, either at a cross-border sort of channel area or even at a European level. So something like the plight of the eel needs joined up cooperation. So it's an interesting question which I hope sort of people will start pondering on as we move through these sessions. So that's the end of my quick introduction. What I'd like to do is welcome Diego, who's going to talk around the Triple-C project. I will stop sharing my screen. Diego, if you could share your screen and yourself. Brilliant. Diego is a senior scientist at the Spanish National Research Council, which is the largest organisation in Spain, and his research is aimed at optimising agricultural water management under arid and semi-arid conditions by employing different agronomic strategies. He's also associate editor for Irrigation Science Journal and part-time consultant in the Spanish Ministry of Science and Innovation, and is in charge of PRIMA and EJP Soil, which is 2 European programs, as well as being a partner in the Triple-C project. So Diego is going to give you a bit of an introduction around the Triple-C project and some of the stuff we've been doing. So over to you, Diego.
Thanks a lot, Laurence. I'm very happy to be here with you, even if online, but I see there are so many people connected. This definitely wouldn't be happen if we were all physically in the same place. So we have to see the good things about this pandemic, that with these online events, we can have a larger impact probably. So this is just taking back from the last question from Laurence, is how to increase the impact of the projects and how to keep capitalized from previous projects. Me as a researcher, I always wonder, and I always dream to have like a project to be able to continue with the activity and to keep capitalize more of the results obtained in previous projects. And probably this Triple-C project that I'm honored to be presenting today to all of you, it's really giving us the opportunity to do this work that sometimes we forget. And this is intended indeed to better understand and to better capitalize from previous activities in relation to risk management with the focus of a better Atlantic area resilience. This is the Triple-C project that I'm representing today, which is funded by the Interreg Atlantic Area program. I think Laurence gave a wonderful overview of the background, and we all know about climate change. And definitely, while several measures are indeed in force to mitigate and avoid the further exacerbation of climate change, this is very much in relation with the EU policies related to the Green Deal. And for instance, so all we know about the soil, the potential ability of the soil to store carbon, this is our measures to mitigate climate change. We also need to put into place some measures to adapt to the consequences of climate change, and with special focus, when possible, on nature-based solutions. And these are the main focus of our Triple-C project, that is capitalizing previous activities in relation to the possibility to adapt to climate change. So we are very much focused on evaluating and capitalizing previous successful EU projects. The final goal of the Triple-C project is indeed to boost the dissemination and the transferation of the best practices identified in the previous projects, is to make more of the previous activities indeed. And also it has some more general goal, is to provide next EU programs with initiatives and guideline recommendation for support new activities. So indeed, actually, the Interreg Atlantic area is now in a moment that will launch a new program in the future. The Triple-C project has the goal also to provide some suggestions and recommendations for the future programs of regional cooperation in Europe. This is the Triple-C partnership. Indeed, that the partners that we are working in this project, the coordinator is actually the Climate Association of Moyenne-Garonne in France, with the principal investigator Jean-François Berthomier. And there are partners of different, we do different activities. Some of us are from the Academy and Innovation, like the Limerick Institute of Technology, the University of Coimbra, actually the oldest university in Europe, by the way, the University of Trás-os-Montes in Portugal, ourselves, the FESIC in Spain, and Naker Technalia, but we also are together with the Westcountry River Trust and the Chamber of Agriculture of Dordogne, which are entities which are probably more in the ground. So we work collaboratively with the academy and the stakeholders who are working the ground. And we do have the external support from a consultant that is helping us with the management of the project. In this case, is Grupo Dex from Spain. Very quickly, this is the layout of the project activities with different work packages. I will focus mainly on the capitalization. So basically, there's been a work going on to capitalize from previous projects. So to identify the best and most successful projects to understand what they have achieved. And this is then is related to a transfer and exploitation plan. So a networking with all these projects in order to identify some general guidelines that could be useful for the next generation of EU programs. And this at the end will be towards a policy mainstreaming of the different results we have envisioned before. One of the main activities of this project was actually to identify the successful previous initiatives. And in order to do so, all the partnership we have screened and studied up to 254 EU projects related with the risk aspects due to climate change. And actually, from these 254 projects, we interviewed 129 of those projects. So we went to speak with the principal investigator physically before the pandemic. Now, of course, online with the pandemic. And actually, we have extracted a catalog for good practices, replicability of knowledge transfer, the policy implications of the previous activity, and also very important, the social dimension of the previous projects that have been carried out.
I think we have a problem with Diego. Your line is not working. Right.
Work, friends, can you?
Yeah, so your line is a bit poor, Diego. I think what I can do.
Laurence, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes, carry on. You've got two more minutes. If you share your screen again, if you want to share your slides, or yeah, I can share them.
I'm sorry, I don't know what happened with my. Yeah. All right. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you've got 2 more minutes.
Okay, perfect. So I just wanted to show you this Triple-C platform that I was speaking about, which is the platform we have built up that can be where it is summarized all the. You can log on in the triple-c-platform.com webpage and you can find information about these the activities. This is, for instance, you can have filter engine where you can select the previous project in relation to some specific risks like drought, flood, and erosion. And you can also, if you want to boost the technology transfer aspects of your previous project, you can also join the platform in case your project is not there, using this tool that we have in our web page. At the end of the project, we intend to produce 4 reports in relation to different risks related to fires, soil erosion, water quality and quantity, and ocean risk. And this is all from my side. I'm sorry for the internet problems. I hope you could follow me. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, Diego. So if you stop sharing your screen and you can stop your video, that would be great. And really good to get that overview of the Triple-C project. And I think that sort of neatly highlights kind of the the amount of projects, the amount of activity that's happening on climate change adaptation, as well as kind of, as I said, reiterated in my talk about the importance of funding and developing these, addressing these European level issues. So I think it's going to be interesting seeing how things develop in the future in terms of how we can tap into some of these projects that will still be happening, and we might want to sort of tap into as a UK. So I know things like Norway specifically buy into various different strands of European programs themselves. Anyway, moving on. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Tony Juniper. Tony, if you come put your camera on and start sharing your screen. Tony is the chair of the official Nature Conservancy and Conservation Agency, Natural England in the UK. He was the executive director of the for advisory and campaigns at WWF UK and president of the Wildlife Trust. He was special advisor for the Prince of Wales International Sustainability Unit and executive director at Friends of the Earth. Also, just on my side, he's a prolific writer, and I've seen him talk at various different events, and he's an inspiration within a lot of the work he's doing, especially on things like assessing the environmental economics and what nature, the value of nature. So Tony, very pleased to introduce you. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Laurence, and good morning, everybody. Just listening to the conversation so far this morning, and one is struck by some of the fundamental factors that we now know are in play as we seek ways to protect and restore, including rivers and wetlands, in terms of those major forces now changing conditions on Earth, is the accumulation of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the Earth's atmosphere. When I was born 60 years ago, the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere was around 317 parts per million. Today, we're at about 415 parts per million, and that number goes up year on year, not least because of the combustion of fossil fuels, but also other disruptions taking place in the Earth's carbon cycles, which are very complicated and several in number, but the activities of humans are leading to less carbon being locked in the ground and in ecosystems and instead being put into the atmosphere. And of course, the result of that, with that being a greenhouse gas, is that the average temperature of our planet is increasing. And indeed, we're now more than 1 degree above the average conditions prevailing in pre-industrial times and heading very quickly towards higher temperatures as that blanket of greenhouse gases grows ever thicker. And of course, the change in temperature and other changes that are going on are causing a series of knock-on effects, including in the water cycle. And fundamental alongside the circulation of carbon is the circulation of water. And there are many ways in which this is changing, not least due to increased evaporation as a result of higher temperatures and more energy trapped in the atmosphere, but also as a result of changes to ecosystems. And indeed, it is ecosystem damage that is causing both the disruptions in the carbon cycle and the water cycle to go in ever more extreme forms. And if you look at the impacts of deforestation in the tropics, and Laurence mentioned the example of the eel, which is one species that connects us with the wider planetary ecosystem, even in the temperate parts of the world, we have connections to the tropical rainforests. And those ecosystems, not only are they an incredible source of biodiversity, they are also fundamental to the Earth's water cycle. And indeed, the pumping action of water being evaporated by those vast areas of vegetation not only are putting into the atmosphere billions of tons of water every day, they're also driving planetary atmospheric cycles, the Hadley cells that connect the tropics to the subtropics, at least in some part, are being driven by the cycles of evaporation and condensation which the tropical rainforests create around the equatorial regions, and that water is going into the atmosphere, and some of it, the swings that are now being seen in the water cycle, can be traced back to changes in vegetation. And indeed, the Africa during the period of 2018 and 2017 was, in some models, linked with deforestation in the Amazon. That's how far that water is traveling, being pumped into the atmosphere by those trees. And of course, as the trees are being cleared to make way for cattle pastures, so billions of tons of carbon are being released into the atmosphere as well. And you can see there a very direct connection between deforestation and the release of carbon and disruptions to the water cycle, and as a result of that, impacts that are being seen very widely across the world. And of course, it's not only tropical rainforests on the far side of the world where we see connections between climate and water. Much closer to home, we can see the effects of the degradation of our peatlands here across the British Isles, where many millions of tons of carbon are being released every year from a store of carbon that is several billion tons in volume, which has accumulated over thousands of years, which of course is a hugely important hydrological feature, helping to ameliorate the flow of water from the land, and also in some circumstances helping to recharge aquifers and to ensure water resilience on that side as well, because it's not only for more extreme rainfall that we see the effects of climate change as a result of more evaporation and changing in weather patterns, but also of course drought. And it seems to be equally the case that the headlines that dominate the climate change coverage not only are about flooding, they are also about too little water as well. But in both cases, ecosystems can help us to build resilience, because whilst that is part of the problem, the loss of peatlands and rainforests and wetlands of different kinds and coastal ecosystems, equally, if we do wish to build resilience into the future in relation to these changes that are taking place, then the restoration of ecosystems is very much part of what we can do in building that resilience. And resilience is a word with quite a lot of meanings, but talking about it in relation to climate change, I think it's really about the ability to withstand shocks and then to recover from them in the aftermath of that shock. And increasingly, people are speaking about nature-based solutions as one of the things that we can focus on in being able to navigate these now inevitable and big-scale fundamental changes that are taking place. And as the evidence accumulates, it seems likely that one of the major things that we can do is to rebuild the health of ecosystems, not only in being able to deal with shocks, but also to be able to limit the cause of the problem in the first place. Including in those very high carbon ecosystems, some of which are wet, like peatlands and tropical rainforest, where we can hold up a lot of carbon and keep it out of the atmosphere. And so we can see that there are some very attractive opportunities for us as we look at the range of options that we have into the future in terms of decarbonising the economy. At the same time, we can recarbonise the land. And this is one of the reasons why at Natural England, we're very excited about the prospects to build a national nature recovery network. This was one of the commitments in the 25-year environment plan. And if one looks at the many benefits that we can derive from a nature recovery network, rebuilding the health of ecosystems, using the existing protected area network as the building blocks amongst new initiatives to restore land and different ecosystems across the country, we can see that there is this real opportunity to reconnect the climate resilience and the water volatility issues through the prospect of rebuilding ecosystem health. There are many things that can be said about how we harness nature-based solutions through the establishment of a national nature recovery network. One of the messages, however, that we can see, which is pretty straightforward and which comes from various reviews, including Sir John Lawton's 2010 Making Space for Nature report, which tells us that what we need to be focusing on is having more natural areas, which are bigger, of better quality, and which are connected to one another. And when it comes to this synergy between holding carbon out of the atmosphere and rebuilding some level of resilience into how water behaves in the environment, we can see a few headings which naturally are coming through and which are already quite rightly attracting some level of attention. So one that's been spoken about recently is the establishment of more riparian woodlands, to be focusing on the renaturalization of rivers in order to be able to achieve a range of positive outcomes. But you can imagine a combination of planting and of natural regeneration in certain parts of river catchments, contributing not only to the carbon agenda, but also to the water quality as well as the water volatility agendas, as well as providing public access and landscape beauty benefits as well. So all of those things can be achieved through focusing some of the tools that we now have coming through in the environmental space in the country to be able to achieve those expansion of floodplain and other riverside woodlands to bring all of those benefits, recognizing the synergy between climate change and the water cycle. Another area where we might wish to focus some of our efforts is in relation to coastal ecosystems. The tropical rainforests get an awful lot of airtime when it comes to climate change, quite rightly, in terms of the carbon emissions that are coming from the destruction of those ecosystems. Less often spoken about is the huge role that can and is being played by different kinds of coastal ecosystems in those shallow watery environments that hug the coasts of the world, including around the coasts of Britain. It is the case that a hectare of salt marsh will hold more carbon than a hectare of tropical rainforest, and the same can be said for mangrove forests, and this is to do in large part with the sediments as well as the above ground vegetation. And of course we also have seagrasses, much depleted around the coast of Britain, but which could be put back to good effect, and not only helping us with water purity and carbon challenges, but also of course of huge importance to biodiversity. One wetland along the coast near to where I'm sitting in Cambridge today on the Suffolk coast, where the sea came in 2013 and the sea defences were breached by very high tidal conditions. That area reverted to salt marsh from a grazing environment and very quickly went back to a naturalized system, which is not only now accumulating a lot of carbon, but also providing sea defences, but also critically is now a very important fish nursery with bass and Dover sole amongst the species that are now spawning in this newly created shallow water habitat, thereby helping to replenish the commercially important fish stocks of the southern North Sea. And of course, when we create wetlands, not only salt ones, but freshwater ones more inland, not only do we gain benefits of flood risk reduction and improved water purity, but also in some settings at least, we can help to recharge aquifers, which we very often rely upon in times of low flow and in those areas of the country with relatively low rainfall. So we can create resilience both ends through the creation of those kinds of habitats. And I was delighted last week to be sitting with the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust at the launch of their blue recovery agenda. Build Back Wetter, got to be one of the better sound bites that we've heard during recent months. And I was very inspired to hear of their ambition to recreate 100,000 hectares of new wetland across the country for all of the reasons that we're going into today. Another area which is coming through loud and clear in the policy discussion, and certainly is a major priority now for Natural England, is in relation to peatlands. I've mentioned these already as being a huge source of carbon that's locked into the ground. And of course, those ecosystems in this country are highly degraded, many of them shedding carbon into the atmosphere rather than accumulating it as they were before they suffered damage from overgrazing, drainage and burning, amongst other things. And so those ecosystems offer a particular opportunity for us, and at Natural England we're very much looking forward to working with land managers and landowners across the country during the coming years in helping to implement the government's new peat action plan, which will be published in due course, which will have ambitious targets for the recovery of those ecosystems. And you know, we've been talking about peatlands here for 30 years. To my certain knowledge, when I worked at Friends of the Earth in the early 90s, we were drawing the linkages between climate change and peatland degradation. And finally now it seems that we're going to get into the position of ramping up efforts still further. And we have been ramping up efforts for some time now. The Yorkshire Peat Partnership and the Moors for the Future in the Pennines giving us huge inspiration of what can be possible. And the Tees Swale Connect programme, which is unfolding now in the North Pennines, another example of really ambitious peatland restoration work that is now not only a theoretical future opportunity, it's actually work that's in progress and already delivering major results. And then we have you know, other ecosystems, including grasslands, which we know can be very good for ameliorating the flow of water through the environment, and huge opportunities there for to be doing more alongside the recovery of biodiversity through the creation of those ecosystems at scale as well. So there are already a few areas where you can see this question of water and climate resilience coming close together in terms of the plans of government and official bodies like Natural England, and of course a very wide range of organisations, from the Rivers Trust to the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust to the National Trust, the RSPB, and many others besides, including private landowners who are now moving into this space of trying to come with these integrated solutions where we can not only join up the water and climate change volatility that's now upon us, but in the process achieve a wide range of other benefits: the recovery of our disappearing wildlife, the creation of beautiful habitats that give us inspiration in our day-to-day lives, and of course places for us all to enjoy, and in the process cleaning up the quality of water that's flowing through the environment at the same time. So that's the vision, and it's one that increasingly has support, certainly from the conversations I'm involved in, as we draw together the different dots of awareness, the impacts of climate change, the questions of security, of property and people, the need to restore biodiversity, and seeing all of those things as not being separate agendas. They're all fundamentally linked to one another, and they will come together through how we treat ecosystems and look for the future of nature recovery. And of course, one of the things that we know from nature is that it doesn't divide itself up across county boundaries or across national boundaries. Actually, there are units to nature is catchments, and the extent to which our landscapes are divided up through the watersheds of different river systems. And if we can work more with the flow of nature, recognizing some actually works, then some huge opportunities exist before us, because we not only now have the science and the awareness, we have a range of policy tools which are also moving into implementation. The Nature Recovery Network I mentioned as being something that was in the 25-year environment plan. The tools to deliver that now are beginning to be firmed up. One, of course, is the new land management policy that will follow the Common Agricultural Policy as we now move into domestic agendas that follow what we were doing through European Union policies. And of course, we have measures in the Environment Bill too, including the idea of biodiversity net gain, and on top of that, tree and peatland action plans, as well as big commitments on water quality. So all of this stuff is now there. And I see it sometimes as like an enormous jigsaw puzzle, all the different pieces of science and policy now beginning to be created. And what we now have to do is put those pieces of the jigsaw together. And that's really about integrating not only the different elements of policy and influence, but also integrating all of the different people and actors and organisations who work in catchments to be able to get them lined up behind some similar priorities: water companies, NGOs, local governments, and of course the farming and landowning community, and indeed house builders and infrastructure providers who will be operating to new net gain principles. If we can get all of those different pieces lined up, then I'm convinced that we really can do an enormous amount through harnessing the power of ecosystems to find that sweet spot between resilience for water in the context of climate change volatility. Thank you all very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tony, for that that keynote and those thoughts, and really sort of interesting sort of perspective to put on the day, the next 2 days. I think there's some really interesting things there around what you said around the ability of resilience, about being the ability of a community to withstand shocks and recover from them. And I think there's an interesting, we're going to see today and tomorrow around those shocks can be both chronic and acute, and how sort of how we help recover them, as well as I think you'll see a lot of the impacts of the role of nature-based solutions, as you've been outlining. Just for a point of clarification, anyone depending on the closed captions, that's it was the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust that Tony was picking up, not the Wildfowl and Weapons Trust.
Oh, did I say weapons?
No, it auto caption.
Oh, okay. Oh, I got you right. Auto caption.
Just
okay.
for anyone wondering about that organisation. So
okay.
Anyway,
right.
Listen, thank you so much for that. We're going to take a short coffee break. We're going to be back at 10 o'clock when we will hear from Jan and some of the other speakers around the work they've been doing. What I would say is, whilst you're having your coffee, there's a Slido function that we'll put up on the screen, which you can use your camera to you use the QR code to take you through to Slido. It doesn't require any account or anything like that, but we're just interested to know where people are joining from. So please, whilst you've got a cup of coffee, when you're coming back waiting, you can put down, sort of go through the link. You can just go to slido.com on your web browser and put in that hashtag. And that way you'll be able to put in where you're from for today. But otherwise, I'll see you. We'll start probably at 10 o'clock. Thank you very much.
Laurence, are you still there? And can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Laurence, am I doing a Q&A or anything, or is that it? Is that me done?
No, we've got a we've got a Q&A session for later on, but you don't. That was more for the projects to get.
No, very good. Okay, cool.
But
great.
Thanks so much for your time.
Pleasure. Good luck with the rest of it. Really great stuff, and we'll be in touch soon, I hope, Laurence.
Yeah, no, it'd be great. Worth a catch up.
Thank you so much. See you soon.
Yeah, you too. Okay, cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, I'm going to start bringing us back together again, and thank you so much for putting all your details and where you're from on the Slido poll. It was interesting to see not only that facility worked, but also that range of where people are dialing in from. Not surprisingly, a lot of UK-based people, but sort of others from Ireland. And I know there's a lot of the Triple-C partners on the call from across Europe. So interesting seeing that dynamic. Also, it's good to see people starting to use the Q&A section of the Zoom. So there's not only the chat facility for general comments and thoughts, but the Q&A section. Please put in some comments. We're going to have 3 talks now that will take us up till 10:45. And then we will have a 15-minute session where all 3 of those speakers will be asked to put their webcams on, and I will coordinate some of the questions that are coming through the Q&A. Do vote on any of those questions or tick them, sort of like them, as that promotes them further up the list, and it makes it slightly easier for me to see the ones that are most popular. But please, Jan, if I can get you to sort of turn your screen on and start up your presentation, that would be brilliant. But hopefully we will pick up the 3 different talks this morning on some of the EU projects that have been looking at this issue of climate change resilience. So, Jan, are you there? Right. I don't seem to be getting Jan at the moment. Oh, yes. Yeah, no, brilliant. Okay, so if you could switch on your video so we can see what you look like for everyone else, yeah. So welcome to the conference. Really pleased to have you here. If you want to start sharing your screen, I'll give you a bit of an introduction. So Jan is the senior researcher at University of Antwerp and is the project leader for the PROWATER project that looks at some of the issues that Tony picked up in terms of things like the use of wetlands and nature-based solutions to look at things like recharge of aquifers and groundwater recharge. So Jan, over to you. You've got until 10:15. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you. So yes, I'm Dr. Jan Staes, and I'm involved in the PROWATER project, and it's all about protecting and restoring raw water sources through actions at a landscape scale. So what's essential about it? It has a lot of partners, regional governments, NGOs, but also water companies, as we want to really protect our water resources, and they are also, of course, important for water production. And as you can see, Westcountry River Trust is also a partner in this project. PROWATER in numbers, it was approved in 2017, and it has to go until 2022, and it has a 5.5 million euro budget. So the main objective is to build resilience against droughts by enhancing infiltration and water retention capacity of landscapes, and then especially in these regions that are important for drinking water production. And of course, we had the massive drought of 2018, which gave a lot of momentum to the PROWATER project. And it was certainly a wake-up call to a lot of governments, water companies, a lot of people, farmers, that drought will become a major issue in the future. The 2018 drought had a return period of 86 years when you look at historical records, but these are likely to occur every 20 years by 2050 and every 4 or 5 years by the end of the century. So we need to be prepared for that. And the drought of 2018 is in line with predicted climate changes. So for the 2Cs region, we look at slightly wetter winters, but especially much more dry summers. And this is the bandwidth of changes we're looking at. So the blue line is the probability 1 in 10 year wet monthly precipitation. The red line is the average, and the green line is actually the dry months that can occur. So we're looking at this, and what we see is that weather patterns are more erratic. So the changeable weather is not there anymore. We're looking more at having extremely wet months than extremely dry months. So it's far more important that we look at the extremes rather than this average. So we must prepare ourselves. So how any year can look different, but it will move within between the blue and the green line, of course. And for the Flemish region, the past 5 years really tend towards this green line. We had 5 dry years in a row now. And if you look at the combination of that, the probability of that occurring 5 dry years in a row is really exceptional. And we're really wondering whether 2021 will confirm this trend or will we have a break from this trend. So it's really dramatic, actually. And there's huge problems. This goes beyond having a drought during the dry season. It's beyond the meteorological drought, where we look at impacts on vegetation, but it's also a structural drought. During these dry years, we consume more water while there is less replenishment. Groundwater levels are critically low, and this means water courses fall dry because they have no base flow anymore. And of course, taking measures is politically very difficult. Often they wait too long because you cannot foresee how long a drought will last, and so drastic measures will also be criticized when then later on it turns out they were not needed. So it's a very difficult matter. And what we see now is they try to protect the surface waters by putting abstraction bans on it. But we see then a lot of farmers, companies turning to groundwater as their main source of water. And this makes it only much worse. As we can see, we already have a very high abstraction pressure in large parts of the Flemish region, especially the Campine region, which is here and which is actually the key focus area of the PROWATER project too. And we have huge impacts of lowering groundwater tables on our groundwater dependent ecosystems. And so there's really a looming conflict with the obligations we have through the Habitat Directive, the biodiversity strategy. So it's really problematic. And this abstraction pressure is only for a normal year. So this is the long-term average recharge of the groundwater system compared to the abstractions. And we have now more abstractions and we have less precipitation. So the period 2017 to 2021, we see more withdrawals, more evaporation, and much less replenishment. So if there is 100 millimeters less precipitation on this annual basis, that means at least 100 millimeters less recharge. And that we can see also from the groundwater level evolutions. As you can see below, blue is wetter than average, but especially the dark brown means that this groundwater level in that monitoring well is exceptionally low. And if you look for 2017, 2018, 80% of all groundwater monitoring wells show that it's extremely low levels. And actually it never recovered since the drought of 2017. So this is hugely unsustainable. So we cannot keep this up on the long term. And for 2021, we're ready for a next disaster. If you look at for a weather station in the Campine region, what we see is that 2020 was exactly the same as 2018. So we had 5 dry months in 2018, one wet period. For 2020, also 5 months where precipitation totals were really below average, and 1 wet period in February, which was actually Storm Ciara, which caused a lot of problems in the UK, but also gave a lot of precipitation in the Flemish region. So again, we're looking at this cause-effect change where groundwater levels will continue to drop. And this occasionally wet month does not lead to a lot of recharge. It does only lead to a lot of flooding. So the only feasible and cost-effective solution is to increase recharge. And then if you have your groundwater resources well replenished at the start of the drought, you can get through these dry periods without drastic measures. You can actually make use of these resources. But we have to change the way we manage the water system. And as I said, these floods, they occur, the wet periods. People think groundwater has been recharged, but it's actually a lot of water going to the rivers, causing floods. And so even these wet periods, they don't count really they don't offset these dry months. And of course, yeah, over the course of many centuries, landscapes have been designed to drain water as quickly as possible. In the past, we had a different climate. We had different impacts. There was no soil sealing. There was no heavy machinery in agriculture. We didn't have these leaky sewers that drain away groundwater. We didn't have this high groundwater abstraction pressure. But Flanders is still veined with ditches to drain the land. So it's a landscape organization of the past. And we need to go to a different way of handling the water system, because we have a different climate, we have different impacts on our groundwater system. And it's not only in the Flemish region, also in the UK, we've lost a lot of wetlands. We have a lot of soil sealing. We've lost a lot of forest area, and we need to change that. And so we need to maximize retention and infiltration capacity through ecosystem-based adaptation measures. PROWATER measures in focus. So improving soil infiltration and water holding capacity, reducing interception through forest conversion and management. So especially from the pine forest to more open landscapes, leaf forests, etc. And increasing water storage in landscape depressions, the very small depressions on the field level, the larger depressions, and then also the permanent water retention in the valleys. So we have a few work packages. We have one work package on how to provide leverage to implementation, looking at payment for ecosystem services. We have a work package on the where, what, and how, looking at spatial analysis to prioritize the measures in the landscape. And then we have a work package on how can we develop a long-term vision at the catchment scale. And then we have our demonstration sites, which feed into that too. So looking at the payment for ecosystem services. So we try to develop a rewarding scheme, look into buyers, brokers, and sellers, and have some recommendations for policy. And we plan to have an international workshop by September 2021. So have a look at the PROWATER website from time to time. So we look into ecosystem services, the water-related ecosystem services, but also the other ecosystem services. For that, we build on the Ecoplan Scenario Evaluator, which is a tool we developed in a previous project, but we're having problems with feeding it with data at the moment. And then finally, I'll briefly introduce you to the spatial prioritization methods. So we look at water flows in the landscape, which are spatial temporal dynamics. We look at field scale, we look at landscape scale. So we see how water cascades to the landscape. And in this animation, you see how water moves from the small depressions to the larger depressions, which then sits into this catchment scale level analysis of water flows. And we combined this into one single map, where you can see we have micro depressions at the field scale in the level. So the brown colors are top infiltration areas. The landscape depressions, which often sit in these infiltration areas, but they're really holes in the landscape where you occasionally have temporary wet conditions. You can hold water back there, and then it will become groundwater eventually. And then we have the seepage areas, we are really in the valleys. And what we've done in the past is we put ditches everywhere to drain the micro depressions where your water will collect during a very wet period or an extreme event. We drained the landscape depressions, we drained our valleys, we drained everything.
You've got
So-
1 minute left, Jan.
Yeah, okay, perfectly. So what we can do in the dark brown zones, we look at maximizing infiltration, removing soil compaction, put there infiltration facilities, not only for paved areas, but also in agricultural land, because there's also a lot of runoff there. And the green zones, you can really convert these landscape depressions back to natural wetlands, temporal wetlands. But we can also work with weirs to control water levels, so then we can have a compromise between agriculture and nature. And then the blue zones, that's really opportunities to develop green-blue ribbons on the upper reaches. So the water system map is also used a lot, and it's been used to draw out municipal stormwater plans. And it also receives attention from the agricultural sector. And so we have a project now where we will implement together with farmland advisors the placement of weirs, controlled drainage systems, and we will also have these infiltration zones in the micro depressions. And lastly, we have the Blue Deal program now, which is recently launched by the Flemish Environment, where they really are going to use a lot of budget to implement exactly those measures that we're targeting with ProWater. So this is the last slide. We had our midterm event last week. We will put the recordings of those presentations online soon. So have a look at that if you want more information.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Jan. Really good to sort of see that, and not only that, but also what it's led to in terms of some of the investment that's coming online. So I'm just going to go straight on into Jessie, if you could share your screen, please, and sort of open up your webcam. Jessie is the project officer for the Norfolk Rivers Trust and the Rivers Trust, working on the newly launched Water for Tomorrow project. So we're going to hear from her. Jan, you can, yeah, brilliant. Stop sharing your screen. So Jessie, are you with us?
I think she's just coming on, Laurence.
Okay, brilliant. Well, so the Water for Tomorrow again is another drought-related project, really focusing on sort of on that issue of understanding how do you collate and understand drought within any of your areas, especially in kind of some of those groundwater zones. So hopefully Jessie will be able to join us. As I say, please make sure you're putting any questions in the Q&A function. And vote for any ones that you're interested in seeing. I'm sort of reviewing those and looking at them, and we'll pick out some of the ones that are sort of ranking highest as we go through. And some of the things that I'd like all of the speakers to think about is those two initial questions I mentioned, which is at the start, which is around how do we ensure impact. So Jessie, if you could unmute yourself as well.
Hello.
Have you got slides? Are you wanting to share your screen?
Yes, please.
Brilliant.
Good morning, everyone.
Okay, well, Jessie, over to you.
Thank you. Are you able to see my screen?
Yep, that's fine.
Brilliant. Good morning, everyone. My name's Jessie Leach. I'm a project officer for the Rivers Trust and Norfolk Rivers Trust, and I'd like to present to you Water for Tomorrow today. So I'd like to start with, firstly, what is the problem that we face? So this is fundamentally a simple, but also simultaneously a complex one. At face value, Eastern England faces water deficits. Water Resources East estimate this at a worst case scenario of nearly 844 million meters cubed per year. The nuance and complexity is faced when realizing the shared deficit across agriculture, water companies, public water supply, industries, other stakeholders, and the environment. So our current frameworks are insufficient to address the demand and supply water mismatch. And this is not just a simple mismatch, it's complicated in the fact of water availability, changeability throughout the year, seasonal variability, and increasing uncertainties as we face climate change and changes in population growth, all contributing to our basic need for a fundamental improvement of environmental and economic resilience. So the case for the Water for Tomorrow project is strong. We are at the start of the project, which I will go on to explain in the following slides, but in terms of the case for the project, the solution is to develop new multi-sector adaptation strategies, and these strategies aim to facilitate sustainable management of water resources by creating pre-approved water sharing scenarios, and those which are also flexible to allow improved rapid management decisions based on real-time data. And therefore it's crucial that the improved planning addresses the shared water deficit and is therefore fundamentally underpinned by participatory processes. This will be done through stakeholder engagement workshops that bring everyone around the table from day one, whether that's water companies, communities and citizen science processes, the farming and landowner stakeholders, environmental NGOs and local rivers trusts, and many other stakeholders, all who play a crucial role in understanding the shared water deficit, but also the opportunities for managing water better and sharing water throughout the year and in the longer term. So by doing this, the project aims to adapt our ways of working, using innovative tools and data processes, and ultimately to provide us better insight and visibility to the water picture in Eastern England and France, and ultimately secure the water needs of the environment, which fundamentally underpins the sustainability and the resilience of our water resource. Environmental targets and needs are not static, and it's crucial to understand this because whatever water management system is created or improved needs to not outdate the environmental protection system. So it's crucial that this project looks towards that as well. So in terms of the key information about the project, we commenced in January this year to run until March 2023 with a total project budget of 4 million euros. The project is funded by the EU Interreg France-England Channel Manche project and awarded based on innovation principles. And the innovation that the project aims to bring to water management across 5 pilot areas. So the UK partners are the Rivers Trust as lead partner, with Water Resources East and the Environment Agency, and the French partners are BRGM and Kabbalah. You'll see the logos for each stakeholder underneath the text, but I'd like to point you to the figure on the right, which is about the 5 project pilot areas. So in the UK, in the top part of the diagram, that's Cameo, Cam Ely Ouse, Broadland and East Suffolk catchments. And in the France area, it's the 2 water management areas, Hauts-de-France and Brittany. So they are the 5 project pilots. While these 5 partners will be delivering the program, it's really key, as I think you can already tell from the project makeup, that we are all seen to be partners in designing this collaborative water management systems for the UK and France. And I will go into the scale up of this at the end of the presentation. So in terms of what the project will deliver, again, it's these multi-sector water resource management strategies at catchment and water management area scales. It's new management tools and approaches to be piloted in the 5 pilot areas. And ultimately the outcome is focused around resilience. It's around an increased system resilience, but for the benefit of environment, business and society, and encouraging collaborative stakeholder management of this resilience from day one, not just something that's created and then implemented onto catchments. It's created by all those involved from the get-go. So I'd like to talk about the detail of what the project activities will be. Obviously, as I've said, we kicked off in January. So the next step is looking towards the top left of the diagram. So number 1 is our shared understanding of our water resource systems and the current vulnerabilities within those systems. So the next step for the project is stakeholder engagement workshops in the UK and France, which is where this participatory process comes in, with stakeholders bringing in existing monitoring, existing abstraction information, water stress information, biodiversity and environment data, water quantity and hydrological flow data, all of this coming together for stakeholders to view, analyze, validate, challenge and debate data that's there, present where the gaps might be and where we might need to look to in the future. Moving into the top right-hand part of the diagram, to design the strategies to ensure resilience and improve the management of our water resources. So that's looking at new, innovative and real-time data collection processes, whether these include low-cost technology solutions or adding to existing monitoring processes with further citizen science processes and data collection. But ultimately, this is again stakeholder collaboratively led to design strategies for both the UK areas and France areas of how we ensure that resilience, identifying sites of water stress, testing management mechanisms and scenarios for water sharing, and refining these management measures in collaboration with the local stakeholders. So that takes us into area 3 in the bottom right-hand corner. So that's implementing these new management solutions. Can we explore flexible license arrangements, improve drought and response measures, and use the real-time data, pictures and models that are created to trigger rapid management actions in response, alongside those pre-approved arrangements for water sharing. And with the uncertainty of climate change, drought response, flooding response, this challenging picture of water sharing and water supply and demand needs to be tested through scenarios and management options. So that takes us into how the partners communicate both amongst each other in Eastern England and Northern France, but also communicating between other country stakeholders and scaling up this project. So where best practice is created through the models and the water sharing or water testing and management testing, where this can be embedded within the catchment-based approach in the UK and throughout water regional planning groups across the UK, and in France, where this can be scaled up and best practice shared between partners across both countries and with other European partners ultimately. So it's a point I'd like to end on is it's a brilliant opportunity to share knowledge between the UK and France as well, learning from each other's different government arrangements, learning from each other, learning about water scarcity and drought mechanisms, sharing tools, creating more innovative data processes, but also adding to building on what we've already got and really making that picture comprehensive and transparent amongst us all. And finally, bringing this innovation in how we collect data, but how this informs our decision making and how we make decisions together. So thank you for hearing about the start of our project, and we look forward to sharing our findings with you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jessie, for that. I'm just going to start my video again. Oh no. Whilst, please, Lisa, if you could, thanks, Jessie, you can, stop sharing your screen. And Lisa, if you can start sharing your screen and bring up any slides you've got. And we'll be moving across to the next talk, which so Lisa's the project officer at the Rivers Trust, is presenting on some of the findings of their project. As I said earlier on, it's interesting to seeing these all these different European projects. One of the questions that came up earlier on was around, are they sort of, we've gone through Brexit, why are these projects still in operation, as it were? And these programs, the Interreg programs, are still operational until the end of the programming period, because they've been signed off collectively. So that runs until 2023. So really, this is the chance to see some of those activities happening. So as I say, Lisa's going to be talking about the Source to Tap project, which is an important project that links between Ireland and Northern Ireland. So Lisa, over to yourself. Thank you.
Hello everybody. So I'm Lisa Stewart, and I'm a project officer with the Rivers Trust, but also on the project called Source to Tap. So we are an Interreg funded project, Interreg 5A, with match funding from both governments in the north and south. So the Source to Tap project is a 5.3 million cross-border project to protect and improve the rivers and lakes within the Derg and Orange catchments. So actually both of these catchments are cross-border. So the Derg is Tyrone and Donegal, and Fermanagh is, Theron is Fermanagh, Leitrim, Monaghan, Cavan, and I think there's a little bit of Longford in there as well. So it's a really, really big catchment, and it's great to reach these areas. So our project partners are Northern Ireland Water and Irish Water, AFBE, East Border Region, Ulster University and the Rivers Trust. So Northern Ireland Water is the lead partner. Irish Water employ a project officer. AFBE control like the monitoring and catchment science end of things, along with Ulster University. East Border Region, they're responsible for the whole finance end of things, and the Rivers Trust is for administrating the land incentive scheme that we run and also the community engagement. So the project has 5 main areas. I'm focused on most of them today. So we have a Love Your Water programme, Learning for Water, Peatlands for Water, Forest for Water and Farming for Water. And the hope is that we can create some sustainable and cost-effective kind of innovative solutions to managing shared catchments in terms of pollution, to make them safe drinking water sources. There's loads of areas you could look at, but we've chose to focus on the reduction of the broadleaf herbicide MCPA, reducing colour in the water and reducing turbidity, so making sure that there's less soil going into the water as well. Hopefully from all of this and all the information that we gather, we can create a sustainable catchment area management plan, so that someone in the future that's running a project like this might learn from what some of our mistakes, but also see what worked really, really well. So firstly, Love Your Water. This is our citizen science water quality monitoring programme. So we recruited 36 volunteers through using the Riverfly partnerships monitoring scheme. So we get communities out into the river to carry out kick samples to look at the invertebrate life. So it's like a health check for the river, and that really gets a good buy-in from the local community. We want, you know, it's all right, I'm having one of these projects, but if you're not getting local buy-in, you'd be wondering, will there be much of a legacy from the project? So we thought this was really, really important. And there you can see a little kick sample there at the bottom left. Our Learning for Water program. So this is our education program. So this has been really, really popular. So you can see on the map there, we've mapped some of the schools that we've been to. So we've covered quite a large area. And we're bringing information into the school about the local river, also about how water is treated, how it gets polluted. And to date, we've visited over 2,200 students, so they love to see us coming. So our education programme, it covers these 5 areas. Where does our water come from? So there we talk about the water cycle, talk about the climate, how that's influenced, and we have these little experiments in the classroom. We have how rivers are formed, what lives in our rivers. So we talk about all the wildlife and things that live around the river, and how our rivers get polluted. We talk about agricultural pollution, we talk about pollution from towns and cities and even from local villages, such as we talk about microplastics, things like that. And then on the last one, we talk about where our water comes from. So we build a little water treatment, where our water comes from in terms of it getting from the source to the tap. So we talk about the whole treatment process and how extensive this is. And due to COVID, we haven't been into any schools this year, but we've made all our programme available online. So we've put little audio notes on each slide so that the child can do it in their own time, or else the teacher can bring them through it. And I've put an audio note over it, so it's easy to explain. So it was really nice to be able to do that. So it's not all just school visits. We do a lot of community work. So we go into communities, foreign communities, and then just general community groups to talk about our project. So we had this rush control demonstration event 2019, and we actually had if you see in the bottom right there, we had a car park version of it. So due to COVID, we can't, go in and gather large groups of people, but the message is still getting out there. So these rush control events were very good. We went on to the ground 6 weeks previous, and we treated an area with MCPA, with one with a weed wiper and topping, and one with just topping. So farmers could actually see the benefit of not using boom spraying. They could see the benefit of using a weed wiper, and that is better for the environment. I'll talk a little bit about this peat. So we're restoring 27 hectares of previously a forested peatland. So we've used a load of different methods, and the ones I'm going to focus on today is cell bunding and drain blocking. So this red area on the map, this is the area that was felled by the Forestry Service. And then on the right there, you can just see that's what it looked like straight after felling. So no one wants to see that. No one wants to see the peatlands being planted in the first place, but our job is to see, can we improve that in some sort of way? So we used drain blocking to raise the water level. So by doing this, the peat bog will trap the sediment and prevent the sediment basically getting to the watercourse. And then this technique is cell bonding. So cell bonding basically is the construction of low walls made from peat, which makes it creates watertight cells. So they're roughly about 20 meters by 20 meters squared. So this retains the water within the cells. So you have quite a big impact. You can see that's 2 weeks later. You can see they're already functioning, trapping the water already. So it's really exciting to see that. And then we used a technique called sphagnum harvesting and broadcasting. So we consulted an ecologist and really experienced agricultural contractors who have worked on types of projects like these before. And so they worked as part of the team together. So they look to see, is the donor site does it fit the receptor site, and they come up with a site-specific harvest plan. So they're there too to monitor closely to make sure that only the appropriate species are harvested. This middle picture here, this shows when the sphagnum is harvested. We only take about 1 to 3 centimeters of the sphagnum, because you don't want to be just taking it from one area, and you want to be just taking what you need, no extra. So that's mixed with merlin grasses and other mosses. So it's used, it's carried out using low ground pressure machinery. So we're trying to do as little damage to the other areas of bog, and so we're doing it in a really sensitive way. And here on the right, you have it all mixed together in a type of mulch with a little bit of dye and water, and that dye is added so we can see where we spread it. And then here you can see the contractor broadcasting it onto the cell buns. So we're hoping then that when this sphagnum reestablishes, it will it'll grow and it'll re-wet the bog and restore its former function. This is another area we're working. This will be my main focus here. This is the pilot land incentive scheme. So it's basically a farming grant scheme that focuses on the pesticides, the colour and the turbidity. So it's the first of its kind. So it's cross-border, and this is a pilot just to see will it work in the first place. We're not running this down in the Erne because the Erne is a much bigger catchment, but the River Derg is perfect size, and our aim is to help them make small changes to the farming practice that will, it'll benefit him, but it'll also protect the drinking water sources, and it'll also make his farm more sustainable. And then I know we're not directly mentioning the wider ecosystem benefits, but all these things add up, and we've €1.2 million available to work on the ground. So the types of things we're looking at are pesticide control and rush management, protecting the water courses from stock, so you have a lot of soil erosion up in that area, and we're trying to reduce surface flow across the farmyard, so that's direct runoff of things like nasties in the farmyard, and then peatland management plans. And then we left it open-ended, so farmer innovation. So a farmer, if he thinks something on us, well, this would actually improve my farm, but it also won't benefit the environment, we keep the scheme quite open-ended, that they can make a suggestion to us. So it's very good that way. So every farmer, when we go onto the farm, we create a water environment management plan. So they have this plan. If they never did anything else in our scheme, they have this plan. So that's brilliant. And then they get a rush management plan, so they know, even if they don't benefit from the scheme financially, that they've some sort of benefit for another grant. And this is the app we use. So when we go onto the farm, we gather information, and they have a unique ID. We select the issues, so it's all geo-referenced there. So we collect issues that we're seeing on the farm, add little photographs, and then this is all added to a map. So on the top right there, you can see that's all the farm locations, and bottom right, that's all the farm issues. So with 253 farmers expressing interest in us coming out to them and to have a little walk along the farm. And of these, 236 were completed. Some were outside the eligible area, this red line, so we couldn't go to them. So over 800 issues identified, so that's that's amazing to, not that there's that many issues, but it's great to know this is where the problem is lying. So we received 150 applications to the scheme, and all our budget has now been used. Well, we have like 1.5 million, or 1.2 million, but this is what we've spent. And then we have for over 400,000 left to do a second year weed wiping for the farmers. So we're really excited about that. So when we divided up all the applications, we could see the most popular methods. So weed wiping was the most popular. So a lot of, like over 70% of farmers took up that item. So that was really, really promising to see, because a lot of these schemes, they might just want the fencing and go on, not do anything else. But it was really good to see the uptake of all the different measures, pesticide stores, so you've less spillages in the yard, things like that. So it was really, really, really good to see that. So this is just a farm or a farmer's field that has been mulched. So the rushes were quite dense and they've been cut. And I suppose the problem is the policy suggests that you have to treat your rushes and you have to keep your rush below 30% cover to actually get your single farm payment here. So, you know, we're offering this scheme, but by right, if they didn't have to cut the rushes in the first place, we wouldn't really be promoting this. But so this is our field mulched, and then we have our contractor on the weed wiper, so it's just directly hitting the rush. We have some stock fencing here and a pasture pump, and then we have stock exclusion here in the bottom as well. So you can see the erosion that has been caused, but hopefully once this fence is in for long enough, you'll see those little banks repairing. And this is just a crossing point, so you would have the tractor going through there with all the mud and oil and diesel coming off it, but we've hardcored that, so now it's nice and clean, and there'll be less muck going into the stream there to the left. And this is some track improvements, so again less runoff, and I suppose the water can go down through the permeable surface. And here the yard has been resurfaced here as well, so that's a nice glow up. And just briefly here, I'll talk about, so AFBI and Ulster University are monitoring as we go along. We have information here about the MCPA concentration in the Derg river catchment and the Finn river catchment. And I must mention that the Finn is actually our control catchment. So it's, you know, we haven't done anything in that catchment, just to see if we didn't do anything, what would happen. So the Derg here in the purple, and then the Finn here in the green. So whilst the concentration graphs give an early indication that the land incentive scheme might be helping to reduce the MCPA in the river, especially here around the winter 2019, both the analysis of the data and the further monitoring are ongoing. So we'll be a much clearer picture later on in the year when we have another summer of data. Whilst it's not clear, at the minute, it's due to the delays in implementing the land incentive scheme. You know, it wasn't plain sailing at the start, and we had COVID, and then because of COVID, we'd a lower frequency in the monitoring last summer, and that's the critical spraying season. So hopefully, when we have another summer of data, we will see these MCPA concentrations coming down. So that is all. If anyone wants any more information about the data, you can contact Phoebe Morton. Her email's at the bottom of that slide. So that is all from me. I hope you've learned a little about source to tap, and any questions, pop them in.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Lisa. That's really great to know. Great to see all that work. If I could ask Jan and Jessie to also put on their webcams, that would be useful to have. Also, Becky, you'll need to allow myself to share my video as well. So I'm just going to start going through some of the questions that we've picked out, and I'm going to do it by the ones that are sort of some of the most popular. For those of you, the three panel speakers, first of all, thank you for your presentations. That was great. I'm just going to pick out some of the questions. Feel free, if there are ones in there that are very specific, if you can access them, you can answer them as well. And so you can type in answers if there's just specific short answer questions. But first one, really picking up from Dan around, he's asking around weirs and reservoirs and features that are holding water back. We might be sort of decommissioning them or removing them sort of for habitat and reconnectivity. But how important are they as a source of water within our systems? And perhaps a question for Jessie and Jan more than Lisa within that. So Jessie, do you have any comments around that, or Jan, around some of the features for holding water? Are you getting pressure to sort of to keep them in place, or is there interest in removing them? Perhaps if I could come to Jan first.
Okay, well, in the Flemish region, we don't have really large reservoirs because of the sandy soil. We do have these weirs on streams, and we tend to remove them because of fish migration, and then it's just the case to have the river channel restructured that they can naturally retain water. And actually aquatic vegetation is a natural weir, so we just need to get that aquatic vegetation back. Concerning these very large reservoirs, I do think we need to find a way to properly manage them with the ecological flows and such. That's not really my expertise, but from the international context, I know that on the long term, these will probably all silt up too.
Yeah. And Jessie, do you have anything you want to pick in?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. It's a key part that I imagine will come up in our stakeholder engagement workshops. But for now, restoring nature-based solutions at the catchment scale will do an equal and better job than reservoirs. So it's about understanding the water supply and demand balance, but how we can use nature-based solutions to address and even improve that water availability and long-term sustainability.
Brilliant, brilliant. Moving on to another question, one for Lisa here. So Simon Watts has come in saying, how are you feeding back the results from Riverfly monitoring to volunteers to keep them engaged and help them understand the value of their work?
Yeah, so the Riverfly partnership have a really good website, and when you're filtering the data, you can generate graphs and things like that. So we've created I'm going to be honest, the momentum's been quite slow from the volunteers with COVID. A lot of them don't live in Ireland. There's a 5k radius that you're obviously not allowed to go outside to monitor. So at the minute, a lot of their information, they're infiltrating it, I'm approving it, and then we can generate a graph, and we have a Facebook group. So at the minute there's not that much data being collected, but when we are, that's what we're doing to try and gain momentum. It is difficult. And Jessie, you were talking about a little bit about when you have a little bit of buy-in. I think when you're providing a free training program, it's quite difficult to keep the momentum going. It's just if they invested a little bit in their equipment or something, they might be more likely to respond to you. So yeah, so that's how I'd answer that.
Okay. And I mean, so moving, also a question here from James, which is quite a bit broader than the individual talks that you gave, although I'm sure you'll each factor into this. So in England, 14% of our rivers are in good ecological status under the Water Framework Directive. And we've just gone through Brexit. So there's a question about there, will that figure go up or down post-Brexit? And I suppose, I mean, we've got one sort of, we've got Lisa from Ireland, and the intricacies of what is a cross-border now issue on Brexit or being part of the EU or not. Jan specifically in the EU still, and then Lisa sort of as Jessie, I mean, outside of it. So thoughts around the type of work you see. Are you optimistic, pessimistic over where we're going as a country? Perhaps I could start with Lisa.
Yeah, there's a lot of unknowns there. I suppose we've always been really enthusiastic because we knew like this money was safe for us until 2022 at least, but in the future it's just it's difficult. It's hard to know what's going to happen. I know this Peace Plus money, we've secured quite a bit of it here in Northern Ireland, so I suppose I'm optimistic that way, but we just don't know.
I'll go in order of the screens on my screen. So Jan, what's your thoughts from sort of maintaining within the EU?
Well, I've been now in this sector for 15 years, and I've seen that EU is very powerful. Actually, without threats of fines from the EU, Brussels would still not have sewage treatment facilities. I mean, that wastewater from the whole of Brussels was going directly into the rivers, and without Europe, I think politically there's a risk of deregulation at the cost of biodiversity and sustainability. And I think what we're doing in terms of fish migration, what we're now doing, the efforts we're doing towards the nitrates, etc. It's all being pushed from Europe. So I think it's a good cause for the environment, at least, to stay within.
And Jessie, sort of, you're going to be we're now in a brave new world. So what's your thoughts from your perspective?
It's a great question, and one that's on our mind as we kickstart a project with 2 key French partners. And I think for me, the first thing I'd say is, let's question ourselves on what we're benefiting from working with partners, and the benefits are huge. They're understanding different governance arrangements. They're understanding how we share technology better, and the EU is playing a pivotal role in funding that and helping share that knowledge and encourage that innovation. But we should continue this throughout whatever happens politically, is the first thing I would say. And the second thing I would say is the climate and environmental challenges we face are only set to increase, and we need to focus on those challenges and the way that we need to create solutions that work at cross scale, cross European scales, global scales. So it's really up to each stakeholder to keep doing their role, to challenge where they need to challenge, to regulate where they need to regulate, but to align on those pressures, to keep the partnerships across Europe strong, but to fundamentally realize that the climate changes are not going to change just because the political and infrastructure changes. We need to figure out ways to keep addressing these despite changing political scenarios.
It'll be interesting to see how the kind of sort of the development and how the UK holds itself to account without the EU behind it. So that will be one which I think we're all going to be interested to watch. Moving on to other questions. There's one here from Christopher for Lisa, and around how many of the issues that you address on farms are in contravention of existing legislation. So this balance between the polluter pays and the provider is paid within there.
Yeah, well, we don't fund anything that the farmer is meant to be doing already. So we would never go in and you know, do anything with slurry or anything that they should be doing themselves. The second part of the question.
Sorry, I've picked it up. It's basically just around, is there anything that how much of what you do is in contravention? So I mean, it sounds like you tend to do on top of what is legally required.
Yeah, but we do advise them about what they should be doing.
Yeah, I mean, how much do you find that you've got leverage there? So you can say, look, if you want to access this grant to go above and beyond, you've got to meet the bare minimum within that.
Yes and no, but we would advise them, you know, if we seen something we did that was not good on the farm, I'd be saying, well, you know, you'd like to get that sorted before we'd do anything else. You know, we're not going at them with a stick or anything. It's not that's not the way the Rivers Trust has ever worked. So yeah, it's more advisory. But yeah.
Okay. And then one for Jan from Elizabeth. Just interested in the success rate of the sort of buyers and sellers with what you're doing, and then also around are the local communities concerned at all about flooding within sort of any of the measures you pick up?
Well, the buyers and sellers, it's in Flemish region, it's always, and that's then an EU part again. It's very difficult to provide to use public money to pay people to do something, because then it's often regarded as state aid. But we're still developing this seller buyer idea and looking at can we develop climate adaptation funds that can really do this job, because we don't have something like the Rivers Trust in the Flemish region, and I think it can be very powerful. Regarding the second question, what we see with municipalities, of course, municipalities that are not exposed to flooding are not really caring about the flooding problem, and especially municipalities in the upstream catchment, they actually have the key to preventing these downstream floods. So there it's working really on awareness building. It's not that easy, but I think also with the droughts, there is more understanding in that.
No, it's useful. I mean, interestingly, in the UK, there's a funding stream that's just coming online that's seeking applications, in fact, for next Friday, which is on kind of getting investment ready. And how do you sort of link buyers and sellers together within that? And I think the difficulty is understanding where are all these buyers and what do they want to buy and how secure is that? Brilliant. Okay, we'll move on to another. We've got time for another few questions. One from James I'll pick up on sort of most conservation projects in the UK, and these EU ones for that matter, are 3 years or so, 4-year projects. Looking at the state of the problems, and we picked up that only 14% of our rivers are in good ecological status. Do you think this kind of short-term project activity is an issue? What's the difference between trying to do these things on fixed projects, short projects, rather than long-term goals? What's your thoughts? So I'm going to go backwards from the last time, I think. So I'll pick up Jessie first, then Jan, and then Lisa. So Jessie, what's your thoughts about project to project versus longer term?
It's a great question. Ultimately, a project is founded on an outcome and a set of deliverables or outcomes achieved with a group of stakeholders. So my answer to the question is we have to work in the project environment and we have to make that work for us, but we can embed these projects in wider, longer term approaches like the catchment-based approach or other international approaches. And if we want projects to be successful, we have to embed them and make sure they are sustainable in the long term and supported by all stakeholders. So yeah, embedding the projects is key for me.
And Jan?
I have not much to add to that. I think when all these projects fit in the same broad rationale, I think it's just continuing on previous work each time, and doing a bit the same thing but in different packages, and so it's the only way we can do it effectively.
Sure. And Lisa, do you want to add anything else?
Not much to add to that, but I totally agree. It's the type of the funding as well. It affects a lot of it, but yeah, I agree with everything that Jessie and Jan said. Okay.
And then another question specifically for Jessica, who are your stakeholders? Is there a place for agroecology and new entrants in your project? I think that's new entrants into farming, perhaps, within that question.
Absolutely. Anyone who has a role or wants to have a role in how the water network and system works in East Anglia and Eastern England, but also in that French area identified, will be encouraged to attend and contribute to those stakeholder workshops and to contribute to the gaps in the validation of data. I think let's go back to that jigsaw puzzle analogy. We're trying to understand that transparent picture of water use and availability. So we need to understand everyone's data and input to understand that. So we encourage an open and collaborative approach to start with, and we'll work from there. So yes, please do contact us about any thoughts on that.
Brilliant. And then probably the last question we'll get to before we go for a break, possibly, it just depends on the time, is how can we ensure true collaboration between organisations to ensure coordinated response to climate change adaptation? So we see a lot of projects that are out there. We've heard from a lot of projects, and not surprisingly, there's kind of there is innovation out there, but actually the work we're doing is usually reversing things that have happened sort of sort of over the last 50 years or so, and so it's restoration of our ecosystems. But how do we ensure collaboration between organisations? So perhaps if I start with Lisa again, and then I'll go Jan, and then back to Jessie. So Lisa, do you want to pick out how do you ensure collaboration of all the different and integration of all the different things that are going on?
Projects like this, we've government and we've mixed with like non-statutory and statutory agencies. I think there definitely needs to be a mixture of project partners and people working on the ground too. I think that's a huge thing, get community buy-in and just link the thing very well. I suppose that's all I would.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And Jan, do you have to integrate a lot with other projects that are happening on the ground in the Netherlands?
Yes, we're certainly looking at that, and then also there's of course water doesn't stop at the border, so we're looking at especially these transboundary problems and solutions too. And in that sense, the Interreg projects are very important, of course. And what we see in the Netherlands and what we can learn there is that the water management is much more centralized, much more locally, specifically adapted to respond to these challenges, while in the Flemish region is very much dispersed among many different agencies and organizations. So it's in Flanders, it's actually much more difficult to work with ecosystem-based adaptation measures than in the Netherlands, I think, from an implementation wise.
Yeah. Sure. And Jessie, kind of how are things integrated on the ground in sort of in your area?
It's again a great question. It's in terms of integration, to achieve true collaboration, everyone needs to understand their role and agree on what the shared roles are within the system. So for the Water for Tomorrow project specifically, and I'll keep that specific because it helps to answer your question, it's about firstly understanding and or identifying improvements in our roles for sharing water. It's understanding who's not in the picture, who are we missing, who needs to have a voice here, and it's about understanding what are the different scenarios and how can these different shared integrated roles play out over different scenarios, particularly when we face uncertainty. So for me, for true collaboration, it's about voice, it's about role, and it's about integration. So really understanding that picture as best we can.
Brilliant. Well, listen, thanks so much for all three of you for giving your time and talking about your projects. Thanks for everyone for the questions. There are more questions there, so perhaps if I could ask the three speakers, if you have time over the break, perhaps you could have a look through. If there are any that are specific to you, please do type an answer and put them in. What we'll be doing is clearing those questions for the next session, but we'll be logging all of them so that at least we have a record of them. So we're going to be putting up another Slido question. For those of you who didn't see it, you can just take a screenshot of the QR code, or you can put in slido.com and put in the hashtag. But we've got another question we'd just like you to ask during the break, and we'll be back at 11:15 where Christine will take over from running the show. Thank you very much.
Okay, welcome back everybody. I'm just going to let Becca behind the scenes bring up our next presenter. And I will start to introduce him. My name's Christine Colvin. I'm the Director for Partnerships and Communications with the Rivers Trust. So thank you all for joining us this morning. Really nice to have so many delegates tuning in, and a great session of talks coming up now with some spotlights on some really major EU-wide projects, both in the UK and Germany, in this next session. So I'm just going to let Becca bring up Stephen Drury. He's our next speaker.
Sorry, I think he's just taking a minute to come back in. He's in between at the moment.
There we go.
Oh, here he is. Here he is. I see him.
Okay. So welcome, Stephen, and thank you for speaking to us this morning. Stephen Drury is a Senior Commissioning Officer for Water and the Environment at Somerset County Council. And he's currently managing two Interreg EU projects, Triple-C and Co-Adapt. And he's also previously managed projects under the Interreg France Channel and the NWE programs. Steve is a real international contributor. He's previously worked at Rijkswaterstaat in the Netherlands and at the Australian National University in Canberra, as well as Oxford University. And Stephen's talk today is going to give us a spotlight on the Triple-C partnership. So I'm going to switch off and hand over to Stephen. If you could put your video and microphone on, Stephen. Hi, Stephen.
Hello, Christine. Can you see me? Can you hear me now?
I can see you and hear you. And if you can share your slides as well.
I will do that. Oh, just lost my PowerPoint. Back.
These are all the joys of live presentation online. It just proves that it's real.
Right, hopefully now we'll find it.
And for all the attendees, as before, if you could place your questions in the Q&A, look for the other questions that you can like those, and then those come to the top of the list, and we'll be having another Q&A session at the end of these 4 presentations. So Stephen, over to you.
Good morning, everyone, and I hope everyone can see the presentation now. I'm Steve Drury. I'm a project manager at Somerset County Council, and just to clarify that this Triple-C is a different Interreg project to the one that Diego mentioned this morning. The full title of this one is Climate Resilient Community-Based Catchment Planning and Management. So you can see why we shortened it to Triple-C. And it's funded through the Interreg EU programme and is a 4-year, now extended to 5 years, transnational project looking to implement a set of cost-effective, nature-based solutions to reduce flooding and erosion. The project partners are based in Belgium, the Netherlands and the UK. You can see the partners on the right-hand side. The partnership includes water managers and local authorities who manage flood risk and water resource availability, as well as farmer intermediary organisations, knowledgeable about farming and trusted by farmers who act as a link between water managers and farmers. There is an increasing acknowledgement, as we've already heard this morning, that the complex nature of climate change and its associated water-related effects requires a catchment-based and collaborative approach with greater landowner involvement. This project, which was set up in 2016, aims to foster this through new ways of driving practical delivery in the field via participatory approaches to problem solving and implementation, supported by scientific understanding and a professional cadre of technical providers able to work with landowners and encourage them to take action. So there are a number of work packages in this project, culminating in the on-the-ground investments, the pilot actions. In the early stages of the project, we had the first work package, development of a knowledge base. Partners engaged with stakeholders and landowners, and indeed each other, to make inventories of best practices and produce maps of prioritised zones in the catchments where future investments are required. And a second work package, awareness and involvement raising. This involved setting up catchment-based networks in 6 catchments. These are clusters of farmers and water managers co-developing solutions that will enable the continued tackling of problems beyond the life of the project. These farmer-led networks are building knowledge, commitment and skills within the farming community and land management advisors, which is essential for better understanding, acceptance and uptake of climate adaptation measures in farms' landscapes. In addition, practical on-site demonstration events, site study visits and land management workshops have been held to demonstrate the proposed solutions in practice and raise awareness. And then we had, running parallel to the investments, partners collaborated on an improved sediment model to aid decision making. This was a transnational effort to improve and extend and globalise an existing sediment model developed by the Flemish Environment Agency within the scope of the earlier EU Interreg project, Colvin. And then we come on to the 2 investments, the water retention measures and the erosion control measures. So for the water retention measures, a variety of runoff attenuation features have been implemented in each region. These are based on the concept of storage, flowing, filtering and infiltration of runoff on farms.
Stephen, sorry to interrupt you, but we're losing some of your sound when you're faced away from the computer.
Okay.
Just face towards the computer so we don't lose your sound. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. Changes in runoff and water holding capacity are being measured to quantify the benefits. So in Somerset, flow pathway modelling has been done for the Parrot, Tone, Brew, Apt and West Somerset streams. By the end of October 2020, WAG Southwest had delivered 83 investments ranging from in-stream leaky dams, large leaky ponds to wetland scrapes and bunds. In Devon, Devon Wildlife Trust has been working with the EA, Exeter University, local landowners and communities to demonstrate how the local wetland type, calm grassland, can contribute to managing flood risk in North Devon. Project has achieved 52 wet grassland creation projects totaling 99 hectares and approximately 89 completed wet grassland restoration projects totaling 456 hectares, leading to significant water storage benefits. Kent, the Kent Downs AONB has been working with the South East Rivers Trust and the Environment Agency, and they've identified a number of natural flood management projects that can take place at up to 10 locations. In Belgium, in the Rivière Beek, the focus has been leaky ponds. A total of 6 leaky ponds have been created so far with a capacity of 30,000 cubic metres. And in the Netherlands, Belgium, working across the border, the catchment of the Kleine Molenbeek, a number of solutions to slow down the water runoff in the field have been implemented, including installation of level controlled drainage on arable land, filtration ditches and buffer strips. And then the number of different erosion control measures have also been implemented, such as sediment traps, filter fences and settlement ponds across the 4 catchments to provide a simple, cost-effective method of reducing sediment loss local flash flood risks in the upper and mid catchments and reducing flood risk in the lower catchment. And of course, they also provide a significant improvement in water quality. So for example, in Somerset, the erosion control measures that were implemented by FWAG Southwest included measures to retain soil within the field, such as subsoiling to reduce runoff, fencing off banks to prevent livestock erosion, abians to stabilise riverbanks, and coir matting to stabilise soil until new vegetation could grow. So these measures have also increased capacity to retain water by around 450 cubic metres. And the biggest gain in retention capacity was through correcting soil compaction. And from the half-field trials looking at infiltration rates, with and without subsoiling, they could increase water retention by around 370,000 cubic metres. So to summarise work in Somerset, undertaken by FWAG Southwest, engagement with and mobilisation of stakeholders has been a very important part of the work. So FWAG Southwest have worked with farmers, landowners and local stakeholders to provide one-to-one advice, demonstrations, focus groups, capital grants for natural flood management, monitoring of the natural flood management measures, and modelling the benefits of the measures delivered. And I should add that some of the NGOs that FWAG Southwest have worked with have included the Westcountry and Bristol Avon Rivers Trusts. So over the past 5 years, as part of the Triple-C project, FWAG Southwest have delivered an impressive 550 farm visits, 83 water retention measures, 27 erosion control measures, 49 soil husbandry visits, 8 demonstration and trial sites with monitoring, 4 water retention sites monitored, and 15 events and workshops. The 83 water retention visits have delivered an extra 25,000 cubic metres water retention capacity. All of the measures undertaken in Somerset have delivered approximately an extra 400,000 cubic metres of water retention capacity. So to summarise, and Triple-C project is actually part of a wider, it's picked up on the Hills to Levels project about slowing the flow in the upper catchment. And the work has received national recognition. It was included as a case study of working with national processes and natural flood management in the UK government 25-year environment plan in 2018. It was a winner of the UK Rivers Prize in 2018. Volunteer flood warden working with the project was recognised as a river champion in 2019. So the UK Rivers Prize particularly resulted in a lot of publicity, both locally and nationally. This national and regional coverage has enabled the work to be fed into other projects, both within Somerset and across England. A number of Somerset projects have been developed to carry on work to reduce flood risk and erosion after the end of Triple-C. So, for example, new water retention projects were started in the Somerset Froome using developer section 106 funding, and in the Brew using EA funding. Natural flood management, as pioneered by the Triple-C project, was considered to be relatively innovative when the project started, and now is much more mainstream. Project staff have had input into work looking at ways to fund natural flood management under a future environmental land management scheme, which it is hoped will fund farmers to take land out of production and use it for flood management purposes. So this funding really is essential for wider uptake of measures. And finally, there is a video that was produced by Frag Southwest in the project, and there is a link on screen. I'll leave the link with you there. And an important thing to note is that participation in the project has helped the development of other projects in the Southwest to continue the legacy of the Triple-C work, including projects to reduce flood risk and erosion in the Stour headwaters, Somerset Froome and Brew catchments. I complete my presentation.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks very much. And for those of you who are on Twitter, you'll see the results of the last Slido about the threats that we're all facing from climate change on the Rivers Trust Twitter feed. So head there, but then dash back to give Tom your full attention for his next presentation. Welcome, Tom. Tom's a colleague of Tony Juniper, also with Natural England. Tom joined Natural England in 2019 and has a particular interest in ecological modelling. He works on the EU Life Natural Course project, which highlights priorities for habitat, restoration, biodiversity, connectivity, and strategic opportunities for nature-based solutions. He's working part-time as he's also pursuing a PhD with Durham University, and he's looking at how zoos can maximize the conservation value of their collections under climate change. I think something a little bit further removed from catchment management, not something we hear about every day. So thank you, Tom. I'll hand over to you. Have you got slides to share?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. I'll just share my screen, hopefully no technicals. Can you all see my slides?
Yes, we can
and
see.
You can all hear
them.
me okay, perfect.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation in the invite and the introduction. I'm Tom Smart. I'm a lead advisor in the Natural England Cheshire Lancashire area team. I'm going to be talking to you about the Natural Course Ecological Network tool, which we've developed in our area team for Cheshire to South Lancashire as part of the Natural Course project. So, Natural Course project is a EU Life funded project for 10 years, and it's a collaborative project between organisations like the Environment Agency, Natural England, United Utilities, the Rivers Trust, and Greater Manchester Combined Authority, with the idea of trying to improve the water environment for the North West River Basin district in Cheshire, Lancashire and Cumbria, and Greater Manchester, of course. So as part of phase 3 of Natural Course, our team was developing an integrated ecological network tool, which wanted to map the ecological networks for lowland wetland and lowland woodland habitats in the Northwest, along the idea of the Lawton principles of bigger, better and more connected habitat networks. But we also wanted to do this to kind of look at where those opportunities for improving biodiversity connectivity also overlapped with opportunities for nature-based solutions for natural course objectives, which are things like WFP and flood risk. So hopefully we get lots more of this lovely wetland biodiversity in the image above, and a lot less of these water-based problems related to natural capital from the image below. So the rationale for our tool was that, as many people will be aware, that species are going to be likely to range shift and in response to climate change, meaning they're going to need to shift their distributions to follow the warming climate. That's normally in the south to north direction in this hemisphere, or even it can be up elevation. So we need to understand where are our habitat networks currently and how well are they going to be able to facilitate these range shifts. So we need to make better networks that currently exist. So where can we protect and restore them? We also want to know where should the networks be in terms of where are species trying to move across the landscape to do these dispersals. So where can we add more connections, more stepping stones to improve the habitat connectivity? Also, we want to look at where could the networks be. So where are the conditions most suitable for habitat restoration and certain types of interventions that we can do to try and improve the habitat network? Where can we make them bigger, enlarge them and enhance them? Where are the conditions most optimum for doing that? So we have lots of different questions to answer, and we use different modelling approaches to do this. So without going into too much detail about the methods, we used a couple of different packages. So we used Condatis and CircuitScape for answering the questions of where species want to go. Where are they trying to disperse across the landscape? So where should the network be? These basically model the landscape as kind of like a circuit board. So if you imagine each habitat patch is a resistor, and then you've got your source where your electric current is coming from and your target where it's grounding, and then you can basically see where all of the really strong current is going through the landscape and where are your bottlenecks in that network. Similarly, we use Biomod 2, which is an R package, which is normally used for modelling the distribution of species, but it's a slightly innovative way where we looked at the distribution of lowland wetland habitats like reed beds, fens, lowland raised bogs, because these have really quite particular soil and environmental requirements. So we were able to associate those with things like soil carbon, soil pH. So we were able to say where are the areas basically most suitable for the restoration of these wetland habitats. So these are the outputs. On the left, you can see for the lowland wetlands that's a Condatis output. So you can see those kind of bright blue colours showing where those pathways are of high species dispersal through the landscape. And similarly, the little purple lines, if you can just about pick those out, they're where the Condatis is telling us there's bottlenecks in the network. So where species are trying to get across and make the jump between habitat cells, but there may be just not quite enough habitat there to facilitate that. So this would be a priority for adding in new habitat. And on the right, we've got the biomod output. So the darker blue is showing where the conditions are more suitable for wetland restoration, natural habitat creation and restoration intervention. The lighter blue is where it's not quite as suitable for doing that based on the conditions. So then we overlaid these two layers and we produced this kind of final output. We did this both for the lowland wetlands and for the lowland woodlands. So basically the bluer areas are our pondscapes and our lowland wetland habitats. And then the pink and purple are where the Condatis is saying that there's a bottleneck in the network for lowland wetlands. So priority for intervention there. Similarly, the lighter greens and the darker greens are showing where there's the woodland network currently exists in the buffer zones around it, where we may want to bolster that woodland network. And the oranges and browns are showing where the bottlenecks are for woodland, so where we might have particular priorities for tree planting, or I should say also natural forest regeneration. So that's kind of biodiversity kind of output, but we obviously also want to make sure that this aligns with the natural course sort of objectives around water quality and looking at where we can stack these benefits for biodiversity, WFD and flood risk mitigation. So for example, where could lowland wetland restoration improve issues of diffuse water pollution? Where can we add riparian woodlands, for example, to maximise those two or those multiple benefits? We can also look at it from a biodiversity net gain perspective, because a lot of developments, they won't necessarily be able to deliver biodiversity net gain, which is going to be a legal requirement. They won't necessarily be able to deliver it within the red line of their development, so they may need to look elsewhere. So for example, hypothetically, if they need to create 10 ponds somewhere, where would be the best place from a biodiversity and WFD perspective to do that? Similarly, we could use the model to inform elms at quite a broad scale. So where could, for example, where the biomod is saying that we've got good conditions for wetlands, maybe we could look at using wetter agricultural practices on wetlands, which could reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In our urban environment, we could look at where the priorities are for green and blue infrastructure. And also, bearing in mind all the way through this is that the model is able to give pretty broad scale sort of recommendations of what sort of actions might be most appropriate. So, for example, in areas where, for example, the biomod is maybe saying it's good for wetlands, you may want to look at more semi-natural habitat creation and restoration. In other areas, you may want to look at more artificial measures like installing artificially lined ponds, sub-schemes, etc. Similarly, we've been able to look at the overlaps between the woodland network and that wetland modelling, so we can say potentially where there are opportunities to manage those woodlands more towards wetter woodland habitat, which is obviously quite a rare and important habitat for biodiversity and for water quality. So we've taken this model forward and try and align it with the priorities of things like WFD. So this is all still quite in development, but the approach we've taken so far is we've used the WFD data from the Environment Agency and associated these with each of the water bodies. We've looked at 9 WFD determinants which we believe are associated or could be improved by sort of riparian habitat restoration. So primarily these are to do with diffuse water pollution, so things like macroalgae, pH, etc. We've looked at a sub-catchment scale, as you can see on the map on the right. And we've basically looked at where there are multiple objectives where there's currently poor condition for that water body and where there's a target for WFD. And so you can see the red sub-catchments have 3, and the orange have 2 objectives, and the yellow 1. So then we're able to pick out those kind of sub-catchments and able to kind of zoom in on where and look at what the model is saying for biodiversity, while also looking at the water bodies and WFD issues. Excuse me. So this is just a few examples, and now because the zoomed out full scale map was obviously quite hard to see what's going on, but this is the kind of scale where we see that the model is probably most useful. You can really kind of start to look at different opportunity areas in each subcatchment. So for example, on the map on the left, we've got the River Bollin, and that is going along some woodland buffer zone, so where we might want to bolster our riparian woodland network here, which would obviously have coincident benefits for WFD. The middle map shows the Blaze Brook, which runs alongside one of the largest lowland peat areas in Greater Manchester called Chatmoss, and this is actually quite heavily cultivated and drained. So you can see where there's opportunities from for example, from the pink and purple areas where we've got those bottlenecks in the wetland network, where wetland restoration is going to be a real priority, but also those darker blue areas showing where the biomod is saying this is good, good opportunity for more natural sort of wetland restoration alongside that water body. And the final map on the right is a much larger catchment, so there's lots of different opportunities to see in different areas. But there's this pale blue colour, which is our sort of wetland zone around, mainly around our pondscape. So we can look for improving the density of ponds to try and slow the flow, but also looking at things like sub schemes in these areas. So you can start to see where those sort of different opportunities overlap and what interventions you might want to do where. Obviously, I do need to mention that there are some quite strong model limitations. Of course, the model is only defining sort of zones to consider. It's not meant to be prescriptive at a sort of really sort of localized scale. It's perhaps better at higher level strategic sort of looking at where we might want to look at different opportunities for different sort of habitat interventions. Equally, it's only, as with any model really, it's only as reliable as the input data. We have made every effort to mask out areas which we wouldn't want to suggest inappropriate interventions. For example, we've masked out the peat layer from our woodland network, and we also masked out other priority habitats. But there are obviously going to be missing data in those data sets, so ground truthing is going to be obviously crucial. Again, sort of distinct zones are like not how real world ecology works. So, for example, if you have an opportunity to a piece of land where you might want to do some habitat interventions, it may not be in one of our priority creation zones. That's not to say in any way that it's not valuable still to do so. So basically,
Tom, sorry to interrupt. We're just running over slightly, so if you can.
Oh, sorry, are
the next
we?
minute or so.
Yeah, I'm on my last. Sorry about that. Basically, it can't inform the decision. It can't make the decision. So just to wrap up the next steps, we're using the ecological network already as an evidence base in the Great Manchester Local Nature Recovery Strategy. We're already using it to attract investment in wetland restoration. Phase 4, this is all to be confirmed, but our plans are to expand to cover the whole Northwest River Basin district, look at incorporating uplands, and also do some finer scale modelling in some case study sites where we might be able to actually use it to inform specific intervention. And of course, we're continuing to engage, as we are today, trying to embed the model with partner organisations. So I'll wrap up there very quickly. Apologies for going over time, but my email's there. If anyone has any questions, I'll be at the Q&A as well. And if you do want to get access to the GI data, do just drop me an email at this address. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Tom. That was right on time in the end, so that was great. Thank you. Really fascinating presentation. Okay, so I'm sure many of you will have lots of questions for Tom. Don't forget to put those in the Q&A, and we will come to those at the end of the session. So next up, we have my colleague at the Rivers Trust, Barry Bendel. He's our Director for Operations, and he's been with the Rivers Trust for 10 years. Barry's worked on and led a range of EU projects addressing lots of different aspects of water and catchment management and community involvement. And Barry's going to talk about the WaterCog project now, which focuses specifically on governance in water management. So I'll hand over to you, Barry.
Thank you, Christine. If you could give me just a nod to confirm I can't see you anymore. So maybe
you've got your slides. That's great. Thanks, Barry.
Thank you very much. So yes, thanks for the opportunity to present on the WaterCog project. Its full title is Water Co-Governance for Sustainable Ecosystems. So it's all about collaborative governance and water management. The WaterCog project was really an EU project that was a long time in the making. I think it was Diego who mentioned this morning about the legacy of EU projects and the importance of influencing the EU funding programs beyond your project. And the Water Co-Governance project was born from a previous EU program where a number of our collaborators on EU projects were of the same sort of mindset that whether you're trying to deliver projects and directives and management frameworks that look to restore species, habitats, ecosystems, or to indeed build climate resilience, quite often there's a disconnect between the top-down targets that are set by government agencies and the mechanisms for bottom-up community-led delivery, or a mismatch between community ambition. And the Water Framework Directive, which was our great hope at the time to change this with its article specifically on public participation and active involvement of stakeholders, really highlighted that a common challenge throughout Europe is that we don't have the right frameworks for enabling effective implementation of these top-down directives due to a lack of co-governance in many respects. so the WaterCog project was born. And WaterCog project is funded by the North Sea Region Interreg programme. It fits under the specific objective of the programme for long-term sustainable management of North Sea ecosystems. And we started the project in 2016, initially due to end in 2020. Then we were successful with a phase 2 extension application that now ends in October of this year. We are 9 partners from 5 different countries around the North Sea region. We have Swedish partners from the Skagerrak and Kattegatt District Water Authority, and SWAM, which is the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management. We have partners from Denmark, both the Aalborg municipality and the sort of association of municipalities, and Staes, who are the Danish Knowledge Centre for Agriculture. We have a German water company, OOWV, and in the Netherlands we have Hansa University of Applied Sciences and a water board whose name I will not try and pronounce live on stream. And in the UK, we have both ourselves as the lead partner and Yorkshire Dales Rivers Trust, who are active in the project. So really, going into the first phase of the project, our aim was to pilot and evaluate a number of different co-governance approaches in a variety of water management settings, really with a sort of overarching hypothesis that effective co-governance would allow us to not only implement and integrate different water management objectives, but it would provide a number of additional social, economic and environmental benefits that existing governance frameworks did not allow us to realise. From a UK perspective, just to set the context, and perhaps I probably should say here from a very sort of England perspective, the timing of developing the WaterCog project and the evolution of CABA meant that WaterCog is very synonymous with the catchment-based approach in many ways, and WaterCog has been vital for us to support a number of areas of the catchment-based approach, including developing a lot of the resources that support the CABA itself, like the website and separate data hub, enabled us to support a number of workshops and conferences, such as the data and evidence forums that have been, really integral to allow us to make data-driven decisions in the catchment and share best practice. But we've also been fortunate through the WaterCog project to be able to support some catchment partnerships, either directly with direct funding or through mentoring and support programs. And the sort of ethos of CABA and the diagram here that will be familiar to many of you, the adaptive management cycle that we use in CABA, was also something that we embedded from the start in the WaterCog project, looking at those different steps along the adaptive management cycle and seeing how we could pilot different co-governance approaches at each of those steps. I'm just going to give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour now of some of the partner activities in relation to each of those steps on the adaptive management cycle. 15 minutes is not a lot of time to do these justice, but I'll try and keep to the main points here. So in Sweden, on the sort of building partnership steps here, we were working, or they were working to support the development of the Swedish water councils, which are in many respects very similar to our CABA partnerships. These are sort of loose associations of local stakeholders with municipality representatives, and the WaterCog project was enabling them to bring together the different interests and develop plans for action, for restoring and influencing activities within their catchment. And during the project, the Swedish partners here particularly sort of developed the concept of needing impartial hosts and people to facilitate these water councils, and developed a whole range of tools, sort of Swedish toolbox for how they could enable greater local participation in the water councils. And you can find this toolbox of some 60 odd different approaches and tools available on the CABA Learn section of the website. In Germany, on the similar sort of step in the adaptive management cycle, the water company there was working with stakeholders, introducing these round table meetings and knowledge sharing events to try and develop a shared understanding for some of the challenges facing their region around groundwater and groundwater management, particularly around understanding water availability and moving from very sort of position-based challenges on water access and licensing to much more shared understanding of the issues and actions that could be taken to manage water equitably in the Lower Saxony region. Moving on to using data and evidence, here is an example from the Swedish, the Dutch Water Board, HHNK, who were working with farmers on the Isle of Texel, where they have a particular problem with saltwater ingress, and they were working with the farmers to conduct a program of sort of citizen science, measuring salinity at different locations throughout the Isle to develop an adaptive management strategy that they could buy into, having collected the data themselves. Another example from the Netherlands here, also from the Water Board, is where they were bridging the gaps in understanding the risks from climate change and how they could adapt. So this is really trying to work collaboratively with the different municipalities within the Water Board region, and later on in the project also using this data and climate atlas to bridge the gap with members of the public so that they could understand the vulnerabilities and risks that they were facing and actions that they could implement in their own backyards to adapt and mitigate the risks of climate change. A bit closer to home, this one, on the delivering intervention side, Yorkshire Dales Rivers Trust, working with a range of partners through the Dales to Vales Rivers Network, delivered a huge amount of natural flood management as part of the project, installing features such as leaky dams, tree planting and bunds in the landscape. And there's an excellent video of the Outer Shore demonstration site on the Water Cog website that I'd highly recommend that you watch when you get time. And an example here from Denmark, where two elements of pilot work here. First of all, there was the piloting of the concept of catchment officers that are familiar to us here in the UK, such as the role that Lisa was playing in the Source to Tap project. So trialing the concept of having an officer to bridge the gap between the farmers and the farming community and the targets of government to reduce the impacts of nutrients from farming by installing the wetlands. The project was to trial the catchment officer in one catchment, and during the course of the project, the success of it meant it was scaled up nationally to a national programme. I think there's been over 600 wetlands delivered, or at least successfully applied for funding from the national scheme by the catchment officers in post, playing that key role of bridging the gap. The project took a fairly scientific approach to some of the evaluation work. In each of the countries, we had some independent evaluation done of the work in the pilots from social scientists. In the UK, Natalie Foster from the Open University conducted some structured interview questions with stakeholders from within the catchments. And at the project level, we pulled together the countrywide evaluation work into a synthesis of the findings from the pilots, and you can see them set out here on the side, the sort of key common findings from our work in each of the countries for successful co-governance frameworks. I'll quickly rattle through them, but you can read them yourself. Was the importance of a mandate, so legitimacy for the groups implementing these co-governance, the importance of enabling citizen action, and I'll come on to that one in a bit more detail. The access to data and knowledge, continuity within the partnerships, and in particular the concept of knowledge memory within the partnerships, the importance of identifying the win-wins, recognizing that people are looking for their own benefit, so finding as many of the win-wins as you can, making sure that you review and adapt the structures regularly from a governance perspective. I mentioned earlier about the importance of dedicated and impartial hosts, and taking time to celebrate results and sort of the human side of being involved in delivering programs of this nature. So I mentioned we were successful in a phase 2 application. So this extended the project's activities to focus specifically on enabling citizen action. So how do we make sure we engage and motivate citizens to be able to deliver action at scale beyond just that of organised stakeholders? And the importance of resilient co-governance frameworks. So how do we ensure that all of the participating organisations provide institutional support for these frameworks, rather than reliance on individuals within organisations, and if they're to move on, a lot of the knowledge and experience has been lost, and the importance of maintaining and sharing knowledge platforms around the data and evidence that's been discussed in these spaces. So I'm just going to 2 final slides very quickly just to highlight some of our very sort of UK-centric focused work on this additional extension phase. Many of you will be familiar with the Catchment Monitoring Cooperative, and we're developing this as part of our WaterCog activities in the 2nd phase. This will be a real game changer in creating a step change in the way that citizen scientists and community monitoring can contribute to the evidence base to allow us to take data-driven decisions within our catchments. I think the concept is that communities should know at least as much about their catchments as government bodies do, in order to take that action at the scale required to meet the challenges we face. And just an example of some of the activities that Yorkshire Dales Rivers Trust have delivered in this extension through their iWharf programme, supporting the water testing that many of you will be familiar with, conducted primarily by the Ilkley Clean River Group, that successfully resulted in the first inland river designation bathing water status recently. So I think that's me to time, hopefully, Christine, but thanks for listening, and I'll just include a few links there for anyone that wants to delve into some of that in a little bit more detail.
Thanks very much, Barry. Just give people a chance to take a note of your links there. Thank you. And again, if you've got questions for Barry, please capture them in the Q&A, and we will be coming to all of those questions for all of these speakers after the last speaker now. So I just want to check, do I have Mike with us?
I hope I'm here.
Oh, hi, Mike. Okay, Mike, if you want to put on your video.
Oh, I think it should be on.
I think it's on, Christine. I can see Mike.
Sorry. Okay. There we go. Okay. Sorry. That was my view that I can see. So Mike Muller-Petka is the head of Geoelectric and Electromagnetics Department at the Leibniz Institute for Applied Geophysics, where he's a professor at the Leibniz University in Hanover. He's at the Institute for Applied Geophysics as which is an independent research institute, and conducts research on the upper part of the Earth's crust, which is useful for us because that's where most of the rivers are. The focus of his work is to explore hydrogeological structures and processes using geophysical methods. So Mike, I'll hand over to you. Do you have some slides to share with us?
Yeah, I hope I can manage to share them.
Okay.
So
we can see them. That's great. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to full screen. Yeah, thank you for the introduction. I would like to add only one point. Being a geophysicist, I'd like to say being a hydrogeophysicist, meaning that I'm dealing with geophysics applied to hydrological problems, and that's a bit of what I would like to present here today about the topsoil project. And let me go directly into this slide and showing you all the different pilots that are in the North Sea region climate adaptation projects, where topsoil is one of them, and you see that they are spread all around the North Sea region. I'd like to start with the pilots because in topsoil, the pilots are so important. And if I zoom into the topsoil pilots, you see that there are 16 pilots, and they are spread over UK, Denmark, Netherlands, Belgium, and Germany. And topsoil is running since December 2015, and we are now more or less in the end of the project, because it will end in December of 2021. So that means being in the end of the project, that the different management plans, the different solutions are more or less wrapped up, and that's why I can hopefully show you a little bit of the results that we have in the project. Okay, so there are 24 partners in the topsoil, so it's quite a large project, and the partnership is quite diverse. We have partners from different sectors, and we have from different obligations. There are national, regional, and local authorities. There are research institutions. There are water boards, and there are NGOs. And we believe in topsoil that is this diverse constellation of partnership that makes the project quite strong. So what are we tackling? It's a little bit different to what you've seen before. In topsoil, we are tackling climate change in the topsoil, but by topsoil, we not understand only the first meter, the first 2 meters. We understand the first 30 meters. So we are thinking topsoil being the connection between the soil and the groundwater. So groundwater is sometimes a part of the hydrological circuit that's a little bit forgotten, but it's very much influenced by the complexity of the geology that we have. And if we do not understand this complex geology, then we have a hard time trying to map and to model the underground and understanding the complete system. That's what topsoil is about the groundwater and about the connection between soil and groundwater. Okay, we have defined more or less 5 main challenges in topsoil, and these 5 main challenges are flooding in towns and agricultural areas, where you have, depending on the country where you are, you have rising groundwater table, which is in particular caused by changing precipitation patterns. The second thing is you have saltwater intrusion, which is especially at the German coast, saltwater intrusion into freshwater reservoirs, again, due to rising sea levels and change in irrigation, but also due to drainage and drinking water. The third thing we were looking at was groundwater buffering, meaning to store water in periods where you have a lot of rainfall. And the fourth point is we need to have a better knowledge and management of soil conditions. About this topic, you've seen quite a bit in the former talks, but we need to have a better understanding, to have a resilience to extreme rainfall events, and also improve our water quality and to improve the crop yield. And finally, it's also about the capacity of soil to break down nutrients, and then where the connection between soil and groundwater comes into play. We cannot handle the groundwater in a good way if we do not understand what the soil is doing with our nutrients. And based upon these 5 challenges, we have these 16 pilots, and these pilots, they all deal with different parts of these 5 challenges, and they are not dealing with them in an isolated way. Any of these pilots has a multiple set of these challenges, because these challenges are not isolated. They are interconnected, and we think this is quite a natural way, but this also triggers the international communication that we have in the project, and it allows us to exchange solutions and approaches. Okay, with this in mind, so how do we tackle these challenges? We tackle these challenges by developing tools, and for instance, geophysical tools. That's why I'm sitting here. But we also develop models of the topsoil layer, and this is quite important. We are trying to implement solutions on the field scale in our different pilots. And some of these tools that we have developed, you can see here. Here you see this helicopter with the SkyTem system, which is an electromagnetic system that can scan the underground. We have adapted the system in the topsoil project, and you see it on the bottom here, into a ground-based system where this TEM system, this geophysical method, is dragged behind this quad here over a field, which is a bit more cost efficient than having a helicopter. And what you see here as well, we're also using seismics, which is something we do a lot at the LIAG where I'm working, and provide this data to understand our subsurface and to understand the complexity of the geology. But we also have lab measurements. So we were taking samples in the field, and we tried to analyze these samples already in the field. So we developed systems that can be brought to the pilots where we took the samples. Very important, as I mentioned already, we were trying to implement solutions, and here you see the so-called wonder wheel, which is a machinery that breaks this run of channels, and we tested this in the field and tried to understand what it helps. I come back to this picture later on. Here you see an infiltration system trying to improve the water body below a field. And last but not least, and we took it in, and we've done this in more or less all of the pilots, doing an extensive amount of modeling, because we need to simulate the different scenarios that we have based on the geology and on the hydrological situation that we have to understand our system and to understand what we can do. So coming from this, another point is that is quite important in the topsoil project, and we also had this in the other talks, is the added value from the transnational and cross-sectoral cooperation. We believe that, that is one of the main ideas of having such a project. We learned that from each other's experience and the different countries, we can have different backgrounds, and we combine these different backgrounds, and by doing so we can get a better result and better handling to the problems that we have. And this cooperation is performed by having partner meetings. We have a lot of different numbers of workshops and excursions. We also had bus trips between the excursions, and here you see a bus where we had also conference facilities, so we can work in the bus and get into communication. Going into the field gives us a better understanding of the problems, and we also invite our stakeholders come with us to the field, because this improves the understanding of everybody, so it improves the communication and the connection between the different partners. Okay, let me then come to showing you 3 examples. I'm trying to run through this a little bit quickly. The first example is, you've already seen this, the implementation of an infiltration system. So we are at the Belgian coastline. We are in the polar area where you have this creek ridge, which are sandy water bodies, and we were implementing this additional infiltration to improve the water availability for irrigation. How do we do this? We started with a SkyTem system survey to have an overview over the area, and you see here a saltwater map, and based on the saltwater map and the SkyTem geological information that we have, we can get a vulnerability map or an opportunity map. And based on this opportunity map, we can then select a parcel, and using additional drilling and geophysical borehole measurements, we can then specify and set up in very detail a model to monitor the infiltration system that's then implemented. And here's on the bottom here, you see the schedule and the time schedule that we were following. So between December and January, we made the modeling, we made the the field measurements and the final design of the infiltration system. And now we are in a time where we have the license application that will, we hope, take until August, and then we can start with the construction and hopefully see the results before December this year, which is the end of the project. A second example is from the UK, and it's toward the integrated agricultural land and water management. We have selected 3 sites in the UK, which have quite different characteristics in soil, but also different characteristics in the organic input. And having these 3 sites, we have selected some in-field sample points, which you can see here, but we also have a control point. And comparing now the field measurements and the sample analysis of the in-field points and the control points, using again the laboratory measurements, but also using, and this is a very important point, the local air and soil temperature, the local soil moisture at different depth levels, and the rainfall. We can get very detailed information for the farmers, and this is something that we'd like to promote in the topsoil, that we have to have a communication to the farmers, because the farmers can do the integrated land, surface and groundwater management, and we are trying to provide them the information that are needed to do so, and those informations are local ones. They are local about the soil conditions. They are local about the availability of nutrients in the soil, but also about the uptake by the plants and the identification of nitrogens within the soil profile. They allow us to estimate the loss and the potential savings through the appropriated fertilizer application.
Mike, 1 minute left.
Oh, okay. Then I'd like to quickly go to the last example that I had, which is basically about saltwater intrusion and about managed aquifer recharge, which we do on the German coast. We developed a model where we could test it. What happens, or can we use managed aquifer recharge? And we had 20 million cubic meters that we were simulating into one of these geysed areas in the German coastline. And what we can see there and what we can learn from this is that we can do both. We could manage somehow the saltwater intrusion into the aquifers, but we can also provide additional water and save the water from the winter time in this water storage system. Okay, so quickly some main messages that we have from topsoil. For us, the transboundary cooperation across the sectors is pretty much important to make things happen. And hopefully I've shown you that we try to work on the base of implementing solutions. It is about exchanging knowledge, and it's about joint development. And it always goes from science to practical management. We were dealing with a lot of data, and based on this data, we were constructing models, because we need these models to have a proper implementation of measures that allow us to adapt to climate change. And with this experience over the last years, we see that there's a growing demand for balancing. And having balancing in mind brings me to the last slide, and it's probably some kind of future of topsoil, because balancing means that we need to balance both seasonal and spatial water availability. We need to balance the ecological and economical water management. It can be soil management and land use. Somehow we need to balance carbon emission and storage, and there both forests and wetlands or peatlands can be quite important. And we need to balance between local measures and the regional impact. And this is important if you have something like blue transition in mind, meaning to connect soil and groundwater management, to have a water balance in a climate resilient area. Yeah, with this, I thank you for the attention, and I hope to have some questions.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you. Okay, we're going to bring the other speakers back in now. So if you could put your videos on, the speakers from this last session. Oh, including me, sorry. Great, thanks. And we've got some questions that are captured in the Q&A down below. So I'll run through some of those in the next 10 minutes while we've got some time. You can still add some questions in or like those that really appeal to you that you want to hear the answers from. So the first one I'm going to ask is from Tim Smedley. And it's about the conflict between nature-based solutions and conventional grey engineering. And he says that if you read the water resource management plans from water companies, particularly in England and Wales, they are very heavily engineering solutions based. So a big focus on reservoirs and water transfers. So we're interested in your perspective on the panel, and whether you think national governments and utilities are starting to understand the value of nature-based solutions. And if they're not, how do we get them to that point? So I'm gonna pick on somebody. I'm gonna pick on Tom first. In your work directly, obviously with Natural England, looking for implementation of nature-based solutions, how are they being received?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned in that project, the Natural Cause project, United Utilities is one of the key partners, and that's our water provider for the Northwest. And I would say that they are increasingly and very getting on board with the nature-based solutions. So it is certainly somewhere where that's been progressing, and I think that's one of the reasons that one of the successes of Natural Cause so far has been getting all those people around the table with those kind of different perspectives, so we can spread that message. Yeah, so I would say I can only speak for that one partnership, but I think there's certainly more and more getting on board, and it's moving in the right direction with that, definitely, from my perspective anyway.
Yeah, I think still a lot of barriers to implementation, but we are making progress. Barry, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, yes, a good question. I mean, we have to be sort of fair in this, and that we've had decades of sort of the regulatory processes leading the water industry to be pouring concrete as opposed to implementing nature-based solutions. Both the regulatory framework and the economic framework has sort of led down that route, and I think it's clear through our work with the water industry that there is an appetite to move towards a more nature-based solution model. But as you say, there are still these barriers that need to be overcome from the regulatory side, also from the sort of institutional side. And I think there's a key role here for us as NGOs to sort of be progressive in our advocacy work to enable some of that innovation to take place. And there's, I recognise there's a great deal of work around data and evidence to be done to get some certainty on some of these solutions. But I think we're going in the right direction. Drainage, wastewater management plans seem to be headed in that direction to help us join up and work on the water industry. Natural environment programme is headed in a similar direction. I think whether it happens fast enough for the next round of business plans is a different matter. So cautiously optimistic would be my response. Okay,
thanks, Barry. I'm going to move on to another question now from Anne Skinner, and this one's for you, Steve. It's questioning why are you saying that we need to take land out of agricultural production in order to contribute to natural flood management? Because there are examples where species-rich floodplain meadows help to slow, store and filter the flow of water while still remaining productive and giving high quality meat and nutritious hay. So maybe it's a question for clarification. What are your thoughts on that, Steve?
I think it depends what we mean by productive management. I think it's a case of having appropriate management that is resilient and is also able to provide a public service, a public good, by storing floodwater when necessary. And this is a big debate in Somerset at the moment, particularly on the Somerset levels. But there is a move now towards looking at more resilient types of farming that are not dependent on very expensive, very heavily engineered protection, very expensive protection, towards keeping the agricultural landscape in place, but perhaps making it more appropriate to a regime that will get flooded from time to time.
Okay, thanks. I'd like to move on to another question. This one also got, hang on, let me check that I'm getting back to it. This one got a lot of votes, although it's also from Tim Smedley again. It's quite a broad question for you. So with reference to the DEFRA Sustainable Farming Incentive Trial to pay for sustainable practices, Tim says he's not familiar with that. But if you, our presenters, were designing a farmer payment scheme to incentivize sustainable water management for healthy rivers, wetlands and aquifers, how would you design it? That's obviously a very long answer, but maybe if you just like to think about one or two key ingredients for success that you think should be incorporated into a farmer's incentive scheme. What would those look like? Mike, I'll come to you first. I would assume in some of your managed aquifer recharge pilots, you've been working on agricultural land and with farmers. What have you found incentivizes farmers?
It's a very good point, because it goes into this blue transition part, because we need to convince the farmers that groundwater protection is worth to do, and they need somehow to be paid for. And this is something the water boards or the water organizations in Germany started doing, like the OWV. They are working together with the farmers trying to change their land use to protect the aquifers. But this comes to the point where they need to be paid somehow. And this is what blue transition means. So we need to have a deal, at least, between the water boards and the farmers, and they should be somehow controlled by some governmental structure. But yeah, we are not yet there, at least in Germany, we are not, but that's the way we need to go. So it's hard to say what exactly to do. It's kind of balance, what I mean, between ecology and economy, but that's not yet solved.
Okay, thanks. Stephen, any thoughts from you on this one?
Yeah, I would also add that it is in farmers' own interests to retain soil on their farm. I mean, the soil provides the fertility for growing, and measures that reduce both sediment loss and water runoff, and a lot of measures tend to do both, are actually not only in society's interests, reduce flood risk, but also in the farmer's own interests. And it's a case of making those links, emphasizing those links, and demonstrating to the farmers that a lot of these measures are in their own interests as well.
Tom or Barry, do you want to contribute anything to that, that question?
Just kind of along Stephen's point as well, I would say that I think it's about getting that kind of long-term thinking embedded, but also just making sure that both costs to the kind of the general public, costs to society and benefits to society are incorporated into any sort of agricultural business models, you know, so because there's trickle down effects from either really positive management of our water system or less positive management, and that's eventually paid for by taxpayers, for example, through flood and insurance costs, for example, in flood risk areas. So it's getting, how do we get that embedded into the business model early on, rather than it just being left.
Chris, just if I may just add my quick 2 pennies worth, given you've given me the kind enough to give me the time to scribble down some notes like Boris at his daily briefing. That's really helpful, thanks. So I'll run through those as bullets. So firstly, the scheme ideally obviously based around provision of ecosystem services and the right services in the right places for the position of that farm in the landscape. I think it's really important that the payment schemes are sufficient and fair, and not just based on income forgone. So what is the service worth, and pay appropriately. Obviously long term, ideally sort of aggregated schemes with numbers of farmers rather than just individual farmers. And a very key point is that it will be backed up by regulation where basic standards aren't being met. I think a key point.
Thanks, Barry. And I'm just going to reference one more question. This is from Daisy Burris. So now that we are out of the EU, how can the UK continue to work and contribute to these international partnerships now that we're outside of the EU framework? And I'll come to Tom and Stephen, as you're both from national and local government, for your perspectives on that. Stephen first, please.
I think where there's a will, there's a way. I believe that the universities are very keen to remain part of the Horizon 2020 programme. And my understanding is if the UK is prepared to put money in the pot, it can continue to collaborate with these European projects. Now, I'm not quite sure if at the moment the UK is prepared to continue with Interreg. It would be a great loss if it didn't, because we've heard all the benefits today of collaboration and learning from each other and sharing experiences and knowledge. Be a great loss, but I think there's no reason why it can't be done, but obviously it will need to, the UK government will need to stump up some money.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Tom.
Yeah, I would just echo what Stephen says, in that it's going to be based on the political will there. I don't see any reason why it shouldn't continue. And for example, our EU Life funded project is continuing at least up until its 10-year lifespan. And I think particularly in, like, for example, in cross-border communities in Ireland, that's going to be that continued collaboration is going to be really, really important, and that goodwill is going to need to be shown on both sides. Yeah, I'll just echo what Stephen says.
There's certainly the will from those who are working on the ground to continue the collaboration. Exactly, yeah. Thanks very much to all of our presenters in this last session. Really great presentations and some good discussion afterwards. And thanks very much to all of the attendees who joined us today. We're coming to the end of today's program. Sorry that we haven't had time to answer more of your questions. If the panelists want to look at the Q&A and can answer as many as possible in the next couple of minutes, then hang in there and see if your question gets answered. We'll be starting tomorrow at 9 o'clock. So if you haven't registered already, please register for tomorrow and try and join the link before 9 o'clock. We've got a longer session for tomorrow. We're going into the afternoon tomorrow. We've got more presentations. We've got 2 panel discussions. We'll be hearing from CEOs, from CBEs, from climate activists, and from people who are very passionate about changing the way that we treat our rivers at the moment. So there's a great agenda lined up tomorrow as well, and a slightly different format. And we hope to see you all there again. Thank you. Thanks for joining today. Bye.